Chapter 1558. In the Z-Way galaxy, the last place of light in the human world, the green lotus bloomed to the extreme, and the 12 Buddhas appeared, turning into statues of the Venerable of the World, killing the darkness. The Venerable of the World descended, and the green lotus bloomed. The final move was earth-shattering. In the starry sky, the green lotus was dyed red. On the green lotus, the gray-haired woman sat cross-legged, and her Buddhist cultivation reached an unprecedented level. The Supreme Buddha energy was like a huge wave hitting the sky, and the dark aura was affected and rapidly dissipated. At the same time, in the inner realm, the Heavenly Music Pavilion Master also activated the last of her vital essence. On the soundtrack, the sound of the Great Path reverberated, calming the chaos. When the sound of the Great Path hit her, the Lord of Darkness felt a sharp pain in her ears, and the dark aura around her trembled violently. An opportunity appeared. On the green lotus, the gray-haired woman was surrounded by Buddhist light. Behind her, the huge Venerable of the World slammed down with a palm, and the terrifying pressure directly collapsed the void, destroying all obstacles. The terrifying palm was extremely shocking. The Lord of Darkness endured her injuries and activated the power of darkness in her palms to counterattack. In an instant, in the starry sky, a huge evil spirit statue appeared. It roared and crashed into the Venerable of the World statue. Boom! In the final confrontation between light and darkness, the Venerable of the World's palm shattered the barrier of darkness and directly shattered half of the Lord of Darkness's body. On the other side, the evil spirit statue also crashed into the Venerable of the World statue. The terrifying aftershock shook and shattered the green lotus. In a move that perished together, both darkness and light were injured, and no one had the upper hand. With a muffled groan, the Lord of Darkness's face contorted. The intense pain made the ruler of darkness feel endless humiliation. The detestable ruler of the human world, if not for the destruction of his origin pearl in the previous battle, he would not be in such a sorry state now. Ugh! The time had passed, and the sky was filled with red. Vital essence overflowed. In front of the collapsed Venerable of the World statue, the gray-haired woman's body flickered, and she finally reached the end of her destiny. In the end, the light could not defeat the darkness in the tragic battle. Her last wish did not come true. The darkness won a Pyrrhic victory. The Lord of Darkness looked at the woman's disappearing figure in front of her, and the hatred in her eyes could not be concealed. To be able to injure me to this extent, your trip was not in vain. Now, it's time for me to see your incompetent face. The Master of Darkness forced his heavily injured body to step forward. His hatred was at its peak. He had to personally witness the helplessness of the woman before him. 3 steps away, Qing Ning's aura rapidly dispersed. Her divine soul was on the verge of dispersing, and her physical body was rapidly collapsing. Let's enter seamless together. Suddenly, a blood-red light flashed across Qing Ning's eyes. Her dying gaze was like the river of forgetfulness. Ugh! The Master of Darkness staggered as he felt a sharp pain in his consciousness. The corners of his mouth turned red. The sudden change shocked the Darkness Master. He didn't dare to stay any longer. He immediately retreated and left the battlefield. In the distance, the shocked 3 dark heavenly kings also left and disappeared from the battlefield. In the starry sky, Qing Ning, whose vitality and soul were about to dissipate, looked in the direction the Darkness Lord had left in. A trace of powerlessness and regret flashed through her dim eyes. In the end, he still couldn't avenge him. In the dark abyss, the heavily injured Darkness King hurriedly rushed back. At this moment, in front of the dark abyss, an extremely fast sword light pierced through the air. The cold air on the sword was bone-chilling. The Darkness King was shocked. He turned his palm to block the sword light. With a loud boom, the void devoured the remaining energy. In the blink of an eye, a white light flashed from afar. The blurry figure was unbelievably fast. The sword light of oblivion was fast. The Darkness King blocked 2 swords and was hit once. His injuries worsened. Grand Supreme, it's you. Sensing the aura of the newcomer, the Darkness King's expression turned grave. He raised his dark aura again and blocked the sword. We have always minded our own business. Are you trying to start a war with me? The Darkness King turned his palm to block the sword again. The injuries in his body backfired, and the corners of his mouth turned red again. With a whoosh, the sword light pierced through his black armor. The Darkness King's physical body was injured again. Mu Qingxue, who had transformed into a Grand Supreme, didn't say a word. He was hit by the divine sword at an extremely fast speed. At this moment, a black sword light flashed from behind. The Heavenly Kings had intervened to help the Darkness King. Two divine swords, one black and one white, clashed. The terrifying aftershock caused the two to retreat a few steps. My lord, heal your injuries first. Leave this person to me. The Heavenly Kings spoke and blocked the ancient sovereign with their swords. You overestimate yourself. Murderous intent flashed in Mu Qingshue's eyes. He stepped out and disappeared instantly. In front of the darkness abyss, the Darkness King didn't hesitate. He stepped into the abyss and left the battle. The moment the Darkness King stepped into the abyss, the white sword light flashed and brought out another stream of blood. The Darkness King, who was injured again, didn't stop. He flashed out of the darkness abyss and disappeared. Behind him, the Heavenly Kings arrived and stopped the Grand Supreme. Back off! Mu Qingxue shouted coldly. He waved his sword and forced the Darkness King to retreat. After a moment of hesitation, Mu Qingxue stepped into the darkness abyss. Just as the Grand Supreme was chasing after the severely injured Darkness King, Qing Ning, who was at the end of her life in the Ziwei Star Zone, looked at the mortal world. She turned into starlight and returned to heaven and earth. Even though she felt regretful, she didn't have any strength left at this moment. The experts of the inner world died one after another in the great calamity, but it left the survivors with a glimmer of hope. Is it worth it? At this moment, a soft sigh sounded in the void. It was so soft that it was almost inaudible. In the next moment, a beautiful woman in a light blue dress strode out from the starry sky. Her slightly pale face carried a trace of sickly frailty. In the starry sky, the aftermath of the battle hadn't dissipated. The airflow shook, and the woman covered her mouth and coughed a few times. Her sickly body seemed abnormally weak. The woman was too young. She looked like she was only 20 years old. Unlike cultivators who could retain their youthful looks, there were almost no signs of age on her body. However, this was the most terrifying part. The woman's aura was too strong. Vaguely, she had the aura of an overlord. A 20-year-old overlord. Not to mention this Dharma-ending age, even in the primordial age when gods and demons were everywhere, such a miracle had never happened. Someone as strong as the knowing destiny state had 10 tomes of arcane and cultivated for nearly 2,000 years before he stepped into the sovereign realm. This was already the limit of human cultivation speed. Even in the entire human era, it was definitely an outstanding achievement. However, everything, talent, effort, and opportunities, seemed so pale in front of the woman in front of him. A 20-year-old overlord was unbelievably terrifying. In the starry sky, the aftermath of the battle shook. The woman covered her mouth and coughed a few more times. Her face turned paler. A smear of blood appeared and seeped out from the gaps between her fingers. The woman couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes. She looked at the starry sky and raised her hand. Suddenly, a shocking scene happened. In the starry sky, time flowed backward, and heaven and earth went against the flow. Chapter 1559. In the east of the God realm, the situation changed rapidly. Floating islands floated in the void. The celestial venerables in the human world focused on cultivating, not daring to waste a single second. After the calamity in the human world, everyone knew that they didn't have much time left. The human world had been destroyed. Next, the God realm and the other 5 levels of heaven would be affected. If they couldn't stop it, there would be no place for them in the entire 3 realms. Hua Zhongdia, Ji Ming, and Qing Ning died in battle one after another. It was a painful blow to the celestial venerables in the human world, especially those from the inner realm. While they were sad, they had to suppress their emotions and focus on cultivating. The celestial venerables in the 5 divine lands also felt the drastic change in the human world. They were terrified. No one knew that the power of darkness would spread to the god realm. The fluctuations from the successive battles in the human world made the gods and demons realize how powerful the power of darkness was. The darkness was at its peak, and the light was completely suppressed. In the age of chaos, the light had no way to compete with the darkness. In the west of the god realm, on Buddha Mountain, the demon lord protected the west day after day, not allowing the calamity to affect the western Buddhist realm. The demon lord loved this land deeply and cherished the hard-won peace more than anyone else. He would protect the peace of the west even if he had to sacrifice his life. Similarly, in the south of the god realm, the rising sun dragon god also protected the land of the south with all his strength. Compared to the western Buddhist realm and the south, the heaven realm and the great northern emperor no longer had a ruler to protect them. The impact of the calamity had spread across the world. The earth was cracked, and the floods and tsunamis were getting more and more serious. The people of the 2 realms were in deep trouble. Even if the celestial venerables wanted to help, they couldn't do anything at this moment. In the human world, the collapsed heaven and earth had no trace of life. All the planets with life had been completely destroyed by the darkness. In the boundless void, there were only dried-up, dead planets floating. In the eternal silence, the world seemed to have returned to the time before the creation of the world, but it was not the same. In the boundless void, the Ziwei galaxy was isolated. Ji Ming and Qing Ning risked their lives to protect it, becoming the last light in the human world. In the center of the galaxy, the celestial realm rose and fell. After a series of battles, the celestial realm was almost destroyed. Meanwhile, at the end of the star domain, a great life star floated up and down, independent from the world. Among the many great life stars, it was so different. The pure land created by the Nether King had been separated from the human world for too long. The laws of the world inside were different from the outside world. Even though the Nether King's barrier had been destroyed for thousands of years, the laws of the inner and outer realms hadn't completely assimilated. Perhaps it was a blessing in disguise. The great calamity of sky beyond heaven did not affect the inner realm much. Aside from a few extremely powerful rulers, no one realized that the world outside had changed. In the extreme north of the inner realm, the Heavenly Music Pavilion's master had gone through a great battle. The front of the Heavenly Music Pavilion's clothes were stained with blood and 4 strings of the 7-stringed zither were broken. The Heavenly Music Pavilion master was severely injured from the backlash of the dark force. If not for the protection of the sound of the Great Path, she would have died in the previous battle. The darkness was too strong, so strong that it was beyond the reach of human experts. In a world of ice and snow, a beautiful but slightly pale woman in a light blue dress walked alone. She walked through thousands of mountains and rivers, through wind and rain. In front of a peach tree that was about to be crushed by the snow, the woman stopped and gently brushed away the snow on the peach tree. Her expression was calm without a trace of killing intent. The snow fell to the ground and the peach tree swayed gently as if it was thanking the woman. The woman covered her mouth and coughed a few times. The exhaustion in her eyes became stronger. Time passed and flowers bloomed and withered. The woman continued to walk in the human world. Even though her cultivation continued to improve, the woman's body deteriorated day by day. The gap of 30 years old seemed impossible to cross. After reincarnation, the results still couldn't be changed. At 29 years old, the woman's cultivation had reached the peak of the monarch realm. She was invincible in the human world. Even the powerhouses of the god realm couldn't sense her aura. At the end of this year, the woman left the extreme north and came to the god realm. Somehow, as if fate was pulling her, the woman walked across the land of the great Xia. Looking at the beautiful scenery that stretched for thousands of miles, her spirit seemed to have improved. As time passed, the rulers of the great Xia changed generation after generation. However, the spirit of the Marquis continued. He was like a guardian, protecting the glory of the great Xia. Fallen Moon City, an ancient city that had become a legend. The woman walked over. When she arrived, her body was already very weak. She had to rest after taking a few steps. Cough, cough. Violent coughing sounded. Blood dripped from the corner of the woman's mouth and dyed the ancient city red. "Miss, are you okay?" At this moment, a young man in red appeared beside the woman. He looked calm and asked, "I'm fine." The woman shook her head and replied. The young man in red looked at the woman's struggling figure and pondered. Why did he feel that the woman was familiar? "Miss, have we met before?" The young man in red took 2 steps forward and asked. "Why do you ask?" The woman stopped walking and smiled tiredly. "I feel that you look very familiar, but I can't remember where I've seen you before." The young man in red said truthfully. The woman raised her head and looked at the young man beside her. After a moment, she shook her head and said, "No." After saying that, the woman did not stay any longer and walked forward step by step. The young man in red looked at the woman's back and became more and more confused. He really felt that he had seen this woman before. In a dilapidated ancient temple in Fallen Moon City, the woman stopped and looked at the fireworks in the sky. Her tired eyes flashed with nostalgia. What beautiful fireworks! Today, she seemed to have seen that young man before. However, she could not remember. Cough, cough. The woman leaned against the pillar of the ancient temple. She covered her mouth and coughed violently. Blood flowed from the gaps between her fingers and dyed her clothes red. It also dyed the stone slabs of the ancient temple red. At the end of one's lifespan, fate had arrived. Even a monarch could not change the cruelty of fate. In Fallen Moon City, the woman gradually closed her eyes. At the end of the night, before the dawn arrived, the young man in red walked in front of the ancient temple. Seeing the woman lying powerlessly in the temple, he was shocked. "Mississippi," the young man in red stepped forward and reached out to check the woman's pulse. However, he could not feel any tremors. Boom! Right at this moment, thunder rumbled in the sky. The sky that had been clear a moment ago was immediately covered by dark clouds. The woman who was not accepted by heaven and earth had reached the end of her lifespan. Furious thunder descended from the sky and lit the entire temple on fire. The blazing thunder and fire lit up the night as bright as day. The thunder and fire burned away all traces in the temple, including the bodies of the man and woman. It was said that this night, someone seemed to have heard the cry of a phoenix from the direction of the temple. It was so loud. Chapter 1560. In Divine Land, the phoenix's brief appearance shocked the world. When the masters of the inner realm arrived at the ruined temple in Moonfall City, the entire temple had been burned to ashes by the thunder fire. Everything inside had disappeared. The miracle of the phoenix had become untraceable. Those who saw it insisted that they had seen it, but more people thought that it was just a lie made up by these people. At the end of the Dark Abyss, Grand Supreme, who had entered the Dark Abyss alone, chased after the Lord of Darkness for several years. He had fought several times, but every time he was about to kill the Lord of Darkness, he was stopped by the 3 dark heavenly kings. The injuries on the Lord of Darkness's body were getting worse and worse. Since the Origin Pearl was destroyed, his immortal body was broken, and his injuries were difficult to recover quickly. With one battle after another, his body was rapidly consumed, and he was no longer at his peak. Grand Supreme's pursuit was endless. The Lord of Darkness had no time to heal his injuries, let alone devour the origin of the human world. In order to fight against the darkness, the masters of the human world kept sacrificing themselves, but they also dealt a heavy blow to the darkness. 10 years, Grand Supreme had chased after the Lord of Darkness for 10 years and fought countless battles. In the last battle, Grand Supreme's sword even pierced the Lord of Darkness's chest. It was just a hair's breadth away from killing the master of the dark world. However, this fatal sword was blocked by Evil God, one of the 3 dark heavenly kings. Grand Supreme's sword missed by an inch and failed to deliver a fatal blow to the Lord of Darkness. Evil God burned his life and turned the Dark Abyss into a cage, trapping Grand Supreme's steps. The Lord of Darkness finally got a chance to breathe and escaped from the Dark Abyss. In the human world, the Lord of Darkness appeared again with the ability to devour the heavens. In an instant, the dark aura kept spreading and devouring the origin of heaven and earth in the human world. In the Dark Abyss, Grand Supreme, who was restrained by the Dark Abyss, gathered all his power and kept attacking the cage of heaven and earth. The rumbling shook the world. The cage of heaven and earth was attacked and became more and more unstable. In the battle of time, the winner lived and the loser died. In the human world, the Z-Way galaxy was affected by the dark power in the distance. The entire Z-Way galaxy began to change. Many planets with life began to wither, and the people were in a terrible situation. The last light in the human world was about to disappear. At this moment, a huge fire phoenix appeared between heaven and earth and collided with the dark aura. At the end of reincarnation, the figure of the fire phoenix was faintly discernible, trying its best to stop the dark aura's corrosion. After an unknown period of time, in the sky above the Z-Way star zone, a huge reincarnation vortex appeared again and swallowed up the fire phoenix. Without the hindrance of the fire phoenix, the dark power quickly spread to every corner of the Z-Way star zone, devouring the last bit of light in the human world. Above the inner realm, a dark aura pressed down. The inner realm was about to be destroyed, and billions of creatures were terrified. Ji Ming died in battle, the demonic butterfly turned into the Tao, and AI Ran passed away. There were no more protectors in the inner realm. At this time, in the distance, a blood-soaked woman with gray hair appeared, using her body to block the darkness. Qing Ning, who was saved by the law of time reversal, once again stood in front of the darkness, her green dress stained with blood. "You didn't die." In the void extremely far away, the Lord of Darkness sensed something. He opened his eyes and spoke in a deep voice. Above the inner realm, Qing Ning's white hair danced in the wind. She didn't say a word and released her full cultivation. The blooming green lotuses formed a 10,000 lotus barrier in front of them, not allowing the darkness to take even half a step into the barrier. Knowing how crazy the humans were when they fought with their lives on the line, the Lord of Darkness, who hadn't recovered from his serious injuries, didn't want to take the risk. He didn't rush to attack and instead chose to continue devouring the world's source energy to repair his serious injuries. Just as the darkness and light clashed again, in the God realm, a baby girl was abandoned in a world of ice and snow. She cried endlessly under the heavy snow. Not far away, in the only village in a remote place, an old woman heard the baby girl's cry and quickly went to pick her up. The baby girl was very delicate. She seemed to have caught a cold in the snow, and her little face was a bit pale. The old woman took the baby girl home and took good care of her. Almost at the same time, in Feng City, 100,000 miles away from the village, the wife of the city lord gave birth to a baby boy. The city lord of Feng City was one of the few powerful cultivators within 100,000 miles. His cultivation had reached the heavenly Tao realm. Within 100,000 miles, many sects rose and fell. The appearance of the baby boy could be said to be doted on by everyone. The city lord of Feng City prepared all the best medicine, waiting for the baby boy to step on the path of martial arts to cleanse his marrow. In the blink of an eye, 5 years passed. The baby boy displayed astonishing talent in martial arts. At the age of 5, he automatically received the heavenly awakening. On the day of the heavenly awakening, a huge fire phoenix phantom appeared in the world, shocking everyone. And 100,000 miles away, the baby girl began to slowly grow up. The baby girl's body was very weak, and she often fell sick. Sometimes she would be bedridden for several months. The old woman was very old, and her body was also very weak. She didn't have much time left. However, the old woman was worried about the little girl she picked up, so she endured through the winter. This year, winter passed, and spring arrived. The old woman finally couldn't hold on any longer and passed away. The little girl cried very sadly. At such a young age, she had already experienced the pain of being separated by life and death. The little girl, who wasn't even 6 years old, cried until she fainted. When she fainted, there were still tears in the corners of her eyes. When the little girl fainted, the surrounding world's spiritual energy automatically flowed into the little girl's body. Something unheard of actually happened. In Fengcheng, the little boy who wasn't even 6 years old experienced the heavenly awakening. Coupled with the rich resources of Fengcheng, his cultivation improved by leaps and bounds. Compared to the majority of people, The little boy had the best starting point in martial arts. Whether it was talent, resources, or comprehension, he was the best choice. Time passed so quickly. In the blink of an eye, another 7 years had passed. The 13-year-old young master Feng Cheng was tall and handsome. In 7 years, he reached the treading immortal realm. The youth who could be called a miracle shook the entire northern realm of the gods. Even in the history of the divine realm, no one had ever seen or heard of such a shocking display of cultivation. The scion of light. Everyone in Feng Cheng thought that young master Feng Cheng was the scion of light who was favored by the heavens. And 100,000 miles away, in a village that no one knew about, the little girl had also grown up. At the age of 13, she was slim and elegant. The little girl didn't understand martial arts, nor did she cultivate any techniques. She was just like a girl from an ordinary family. However, in the girl's Dantian Chi Sea, after 7 years, it had already formed a huge ocean. It was so wide that one couldn't see the end of it. Even a treading immortal realm warrior would pale in comparison. Around the girl, heaven and earth's spiritual energy constantly flowed into her body. As the girl's Dantian Chi Sea opened up, the spiritual energy flowed faster and faster. Young Master Feng Cheng will definitely become the youngest heavenly Tao realm warrior in the history of the gods. In Feng Cheng, the consecrators of Feng Cheng witnessed the miraculous cultivation progress of young Master Feng Cheng. All of them sighed. Boom! At this moment, in the distant north, the sky changed color as the wind and clouds surged. Heavenly Tao tribulation. In Feng Cheng, a consecrator sensed the changes in the north and exclaimed, "Which senior has stepped into the heavenly Tao realm?" In the north, in a village with only a few families, a girl stopped what she was doing and looked at the horizon with a frown. The next moment, lightning bolts descended from the sky. Chapter 1561. In the northern region of the divine world, in a village 100,000 miles north of Phoenix City, lightning was surging as the sky changed color. The heavenly Tao's calamity was earth-shattering. Under the lightning, a young girl looked at the sky with puzzlement. The lightning descended, but before it could land on the girl, it quickly dissipated, unable to harm her at all. It was a shocking scene. On the girl's body, a bluish-white brilliance faintly appeared, impervious to all attacks. Why? The girl was puzzled, unable to understand why the lightning struck her. In the village, the villagers looked at the girl as though she was a monster. Their faces were filled with horror. Under the lightning, the girl looked back and saw the villagers' horrified gazes. Her expression dimmed slightly. Although she did not know why the lightning in the sky struck her, she knew that she was an anomaly in the eyes of the villagers. A day later, when the lightning dissipated, the girl left the village. In Phoenix City, the youth practiced martial arts and his cultivation rose day by day. He was the focus of the entire northern region's attention. A 13-year-old treading immortal was unprecedented. The Lord of Phoenix City gathered the best swordsmiths in the northern region. Then he searched the entire northern region for rare divine materials to forge an unparalleled sharp divine sword. When the youth was 15, he reached the peak of the treading immortal realm, just a step away from the heavenly Tao realm. And at that moment, the divine sword was finally forged. On the day the divine sword was forged, the clouds in the 9 heavens changed as lightning descended. The youth used his blood as the tip of the divine sword. In an instant, the sword beam soared into the sky, splitting apart the tribulation clouds. The youth obtained the divine sword and broke through the heavenly Tao realm's barrier, officially stepping into the heavenly Tao realm. A 15-year-old heavenly Tao realm expert was terrifying. No one had ever heard of such a feat. The Lord of Phoenix City was overjoyed and invited all the heroes in the world to celebrate. Ever since Empress Shui Yun's disappearance, the northern region no longer had a ruler. The heavenly Tao realm experts had their own camps, and no one was willing to bow their heads to others. However, the appearance of a peerless genius in Phoenix City allowed the city to suppress many factions. Perhaps it would not be long before Phoenix City truly stood above all the other factions. Not far from Phoenix City, in the Full Moon Dynasty, a young girl entered the dynasty's borders. In 2 years, she read all the books in the world. Although she was a girl, her talent was unparalleled. When the emperor of the Full Moon dynasty heard of such a remarkable girl among the people, he specially issued a decree to summon her. The young girl entered the hall. In the hall, the 4 great scholars were ordered to wait. During the debate in the imperial court, the young girl used her astonishing talent to defeat 4 world-renowned scholars, shocking the world. That year, the young girl was conferred the title of Kingdom Knight and became the youngest Kingdom Knight in the history of Yueluan Kingdom. The beauty of the young girl, coupled with the sharpness of young master Feng Cheng, made the 2 of them the Northern Territory's civil and martial prowess. Their radiance was incomparable. The young girl and the young man both knew of each other's existence, but neither of them had seen each other before. Finally, when the youth was 17 years old, he achieved great success in the Tao of the Sword. He hacked apart the heavens with a single strike, shocking the world once again. He had entered the clear Tao at a young age, but his combat strength was already close to the Tao extermination realm. It was terrifying. This year, the young man defeated the Lord of Phoenix City and became the #1 expert in Phoenix City. Phoenix City Sword God. He was a name that shook the world, a 17-year-old expert of the path of reasoning. He was only half a step away from becoming the ruler of a region. The youth left the city and began to challenge the world. In a year, the youth challenged the 33 large sects of the Northern Territory. He won 33 consecutive battles without a single defeat. At 18 years old, the youth was half a step into the path of destruction. After defeating the immortal lords of the 33 large sects, his status in the Northern Territory was no different from Empress Shui Yun's. In the Western Buddhist world and the Southern Divine world, the demon supremacy and the rising sun flood god witnessed the youth's astonishing growth with their own eyes. No one interfered. The Northern Territory needed a ruler, and this youth was the best candidate. After the youth defeated the immortal lords of the 33 large sects, he headed for Yueluan Kingdom. The imperial tutor of Yueluan Kingdom was a peak path reasoning grand cultivator. He had extraordinary strength and could be said to be the strongest person in Yueluan Kingdom. For many years, the Yueluan Kingdom had prospered because of the imperial tutor's existence. From the east, the youth wielded his sword and fought his way to Yueluan Kingdom's capital. The stunning Phoenix City Sword God was unstoppable. Experts of the heavenly Tao realm could not even withstand a single strike from the youth. The youth's overbearing edge forced the Yueluan Kingdom's imperial tutor to take action. This battle could be said to be the most intense battle since the youth challenged the world. The Yueluan Kingdom's imperial tutor was abnormally powerful. He was not much weaker than the empress of the past. The youth fought very hard and was stained red several times during the battle. However, the youth still won. The youth's divine sword sliced through the Yueluan Kingdom's imperial tutor's staff, severely injuring the guardian of Yueluan Kingdom. Boom! Just as the two's battle came to an end, in the southwest corner of Yueluan Kingdom's capital, an astonishing aura exploded in an inconspicuous residence. It caused the world to change color as lightning struck. There's another expert. The youth sensed an extremely powerful spiritual energy fluctuation in the distance as his expression turned solemn. Without any hesitation, the youth took a step forward and rushed towards the southwest corner of the capital. All around the capital, the nobles of Yueluan Kingdom looked towards the location where the lightning tribulation was descending. All of them were shocked. That direction was the residence of the female Kingdom Knight. In the Kingdom Knight's residence, the girl's body was surrounded by a white luster that formed a barrier that blocked the sea of lightning. Compared to 3 years ago, the girl had grown a lot. Not only was she astonishingly talented, but she had also officially stepped onto the path of martial arts. Lightning struck from the sky and blocked the white luster, making it difficult for it to pass through. The heavenly tribulation was endless, but the girl looked fearless. Her slender hand was surrounded by the white luster, and an ordinary sword flew over. It directly cut through tens of thousands of thunderbolts. At the same time, in the east, the youth rushed over. Seeing the girl's astonishing sword, a strong desire to fight burst out from his eyes. The youth came out to challenge the girl, wanting to compete with her. After seeing the youth, the girl guessed his identity. After all, in the northern region, the only person who had such a powerful sword will was the Phoenix City sword god. In the capital, experts were constantly rushing over from all directions because the fluctuations of the heavenly tribulation just now were too shocking. The girl stood quietly in the residence, looking at the youth in front of her who was challenging her with a sword. She frowned again. "Please enlighten me," the youth said with a calm expression. Outside the Kingdom Knight's residence, even the consecrators of Ueluan Kingdom had rushed over. The Phoenix City sword god was too powerful, so they had to be careful of his whereabouts. The situation outside the residence was changing, but the atmosphere in the Kingdom Knight's residence was relatively quiet. The girl looked at the youth in front of her without saying a word. For a few seconds, the youth waited for the girl to make a move. However, the girl didn't move at all. Her eyes were calm, without any ripples. After 10 seconds, the youth drew his sword. As soon as the sword was drawn, the wind and clouds were in chaos. In an instant, the two geniuses of the northern region officially confronted each other. The divine sword was extremely sharp. It cut through the void and rushed in front of the girl. Then, a shocking scene happened. The moment the divine sword in the youth's hand was about to touch the girl, the brilliance on the divine sword dissipated. The white luster of the moon appeared around the girl and dissipated the sharpness of the divine sword. At the same time, the ordinary sword was drawn out of the sheath and defeated the enemy with one strike. Chapter 1562. In the north, the Ueluan Kingdom, the twin walls of civil and martial arts had officially clashed. In just one move, the young sword god of Phoenix City had suffered a crushing defeat. The result shocked the world. The sword god of Phoenix City, who had defeated the 33 lords of the Immortal Mountains in the north, had suffered a crushing defeat in one move. It was beyond everyone's expectations. In an instant, the female Kingdom Knight of the Ueluan Kingdom had attracted the attention of the world. The realm of the gods valued martial prowess. Even though the girl and the young sword god of Phoenix City were known as the twin walls of civil and martial arts of the north, the young sword god of Phoenix City had received far more attention than the girl. Now, the Kingdom Knight of the Ueluan Kingdom had shocked the entire realm of the gods. To defeat the sword god of Phoenix City in one move, even a Tao annihilation expert would find it difficult to do so. Could it be that the Kingdom Knight of the Ueluan Kingdom has surpassed the Tao annihilation realm? In the realm of the gods, the heavenly Tao realm experts looked at the north in shock. Two peerless geniuses have appeared in the same era. I wonder if it's lucky or unlucky. The young sword god of Phoenix City had a high chance of becoming the strongest person in the realm of the gods. Now that he has suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of the Kingdom Knight, it will be difficult for him to improve in the future. What a pity! Who would have thought that the Ueluan Kingdom would have such a powerful Kingdom Knight? The sword god of Phoenix City is already a peerless expert comparable to the Tao annihilation realm. In any other era, it would be impossible for someone of the same generation to suppress her. It can only be said that the sword god of Phoenix City was born in the wrong era. In the realm of the gods, the celestial venerables who had witnessed the battle sighed. Perhaps it was their honor to witness the birth of two peerless geniuses in this era. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before the two of them grew into peerless experts who could shock the 9 heavens and 10 lands. Heroes emerge in troubled times. A new era has come. In the southern region of the realm of the gods, the rising sun flood god and the demon supremacy looked at the north with solemn expressions. The talent of these two is truly astonishing. In front of the rising sun temple, the moon goddess said, "Brother, do you remember when such monstrous geniuses appeared?" The rising sun flood god shook his head. Even the lord of the East immortal world, whose name once shook the 9 majors and 10 lands, had to cultivate for 1,000 years to reach his current level. An 18-year-old Tao extinguisher realm expert is almost unimaginable. The path of martial arts was divided into the Hotian, Xiantian, Immortal Treading, and Heavenly Tao realms. It seemed like there were only 4 major realms, but the difference between each major realm was like the difference between heaven and earth. Even a peerless genius of an era would need 100 years or even 1,000 years to cross a major realm. But in front of these two people, the chasm between realms didn't seem to exist. In the north, the young god of swords of Phoenix City was defeated and returned to Phoenix City. Returning to Phoenix City after a year, everything had changed. The glory he had before his departure was no longer there. His undefeated legend had been shattered. In front of the city, the Lord of Feng City was silently waiting. When he saw his son return, his expression dimmed. "Father!" The youth bowed and said, "Don't be discouraged." Like all fathers in the world, the first thing Feng Qing did was to comfort his child. The young man smiled and said, "Father, don't worry, I'm fine." On the streets of the city, father and son had a heart-to-heart talk before returning to the city lord's residence. In the next 3 years, the youth did not leave Phoenix City. He focused on his swordsmanship. Starting from the most basic slash and stab, the god of swords of Phoenix City relearned his swordsmanship in order to reach a higher level of sword Dao. When the sword reached the extreme, it returned to its original state. At the beginning of the sword, there was only a slash and a stab. The Lord of Feng City witnessed the changes in the youth with his own eyes. From the initial sharpness to the current state of returning to its original state, he did not know whether to feel gratified or emotional. He knew that his child had grown up. Failure might not be a bad thing at times. At the same time, in the Yueluan Kingdom, the young girl's residence was bustling with visitors for the past year. High officials and powerful cultivators came to visit, but they were all politely rejected by the young girl. Even though she had defeated the young god of swords of Phoenix City and become famous, the young girl's daily routine did not change. Apart from reading and writing, she would trim the flowers and plants in the courtyard. The young girl rarely cultivated. However, reading and writing, trimming the flowers and plants was the best cultivation for the young girl. Day after day, the young girl's cultivation continued to rise rapidly. Her every movement contained the principles of heaven and earth, a realm that ordinary people could not understand. To some extent, the young girl was already the #1 person in the realm of the gods. In terms of realm, even the demon lord of Buddha Mountain and the sea god of the southern region were slightly inferior to her. In the east of the realm of the gods, the experts from the human world had almost disappeared since they came to the realm of the gods. They rarely appeared in front of people. The great calamity of the human world made the experts of the human world realize the urgency of time. They cultivated day by day in order to one day have the power to fight back against the darkness. The incident in the north of the realm of the gods spread to the east. However, the experts of the east did not appear because they knew that no matter how strong a genius was, if they could not surpass the constraints of heaven and earth, they would not be able to survive this great calamity. If heaven and earth were destroyed, the human world would only be left with darkness. In the north of the realm of the gods, the most peaceful 3 years passed. The young god of swords of Phoenix City finally left Phoenix City. 3 years later, the young boy had grown into a handsome young man. He preferred plain white clothes and his aura was restrained. He looked no different from an ordinary person. When the young boy left Phoenix City, the wind and clouds moved in the sky. It was a shocking scene. All the people of the realm of the gods looked at the north with serious expressions. The young god of swords of Phoenix City was stronger than he was 3 years ago. Moreover, his aura was completely different. If the god of swords of Phoenix City 3 years ago was a sharp divine sword, now the sword had returned to its scabbard and its sharpness could be retracted freely. In the capital of Yueluan Kingdom, in a quiet courtyard in the southwest of the city, a young girl felt the strong sword pressure from the east. She ignored it and continued trimming the flowers and plants in the courtyard. The world watched as the god of swords of Phoenix City walked from the east and arrived at the capital of Yueluan Kingdom. In front of the courtyard, the young boy stopped and looked at the young girl who was busy in the courtyard. He did not disturb her. After an unknown period of time, the young girl finished trimming the flowers and plants in the courtyard. She looked out of the courtyard and said softly, "Come in." "Thank you." The young boy thanked her and stepped into the courtyard. In the courtyard, the two of them looked at each other. The young boy looked at the young girl in front of him and said, "Please advise me." "You have become stronger," the young girl said calmly. The young boy pulled out his divine sword and said, 3 years ago, I am indebted to you for showing me mercy. Today, I would like to ask for your advice again." The young girl nodded and said, "Come." As soon as she finished speaking, the atmosphere in the courtyard changed. The shocking aura instantly materialized and caused the surrounding space to distort violently. The young boy moved like lightning and swept in front of the young girl. It was a simple yet sharp sword. It was simple and unadorned, but it had the power to cut through the sky. Around the young girl, a white light rose. In an instant, an extremely heavy aura spread out and dispersed the sword will that filled the sky. Sovereign. In the southern region of the realm of the gods and the western world of Buddhism, the rising sun dragon god and the demon lord felt the powerful aura from the north and their expressions changed. Boom. In the north, the sovereign had started the battle. The heavens were shocked. Chapter 1563. In the dark abyss, the Grand Supreme waved his sword and broke the bindings. He stepped out of the dark abyss. Outside the dark abyss, the once prosperous human world had turned into a boundless void. All the stars had disappeared and collapsed. In the void, the dark abyss filled the air. In the dark abyss, thousands of threads intertwined. The Lord of Darkness stood among them, his aura rising day by day. After devouring the origin of heaven and earth, the Lord of Darkness gradually recovered. He was not inferior to his peak. In the chest of the Lord of Darkness, a strong dark abyss gathered and formed a black pearl. The origin pearl of life reappeared. Its power was majestic and shocking. The cold aura made people shudder. In the last place of light in the human world, in front of the Z-Way galaxy, a white-haired woman sat cross-legged on a green lotus. Her body was filled with Buddha's light, resisting the increasing dark abyss. Qing Ning, who had once turned into Tao, had a better understanding of Tao than anyone else in the world. Although the darkness was strong, it could not surpass the Buddha's power of light. The confrontation between light and darkness had lasted for decades. The Lord of Darkness was afraid of the madness of humans when they fought for their lives. Before he gathered all his power, he was unwilling to fight with the last guardian of the human world. However, as time passed, the Lord of Darkness, who had devoured the origin of the human world, gradually recovered to his peak. There were even signs of a breakthrough. The last light in the human world was about to be extinguished. There was not much time left for the human world. In the north of the heavenly world, in the capital of the Ueluan kingdom, after 3 years, the Feng city sword god and the girl fought again. The girl entered the monarch realm. Her cultivation was extremely strong. Her body was surrounded by a white light and was invulnerable. Compared to the girl, the young sword god of Feng City's cultivation did not change much compared to 3 years ago. However, his swordsmanship was very different. The divine sword was unsheathed. An earth-shattering sword power swept through the entire capital of the Ueluan kingdom. All the gods and demons in the heavenly world felt the strong sword pressure in the north and were shocked. The sword of the young sword god of Feng City was so strong. In the capital of the Ueluan kingdom, the sword chi intertwined. The sword chi passed through the bodies of the commoners but did not hurt them. However, it was this gentle sword that made all the gods and devils feel an indescribable pressure. In a small courtyard in the southwest of the capital, the sword chi spread out with the courtyard as the center. The sword will of the sword was shocking. In the center of the sword chi, the Phoenix City sword god walked forward step by step. His pace was not fast, but each step was as heavy as a mountain. Within the storm of sword energy, the young girl stood still. She looked at the youth walking towards her and softly said, "Your sword has changed. Miss, you have to be careful. I still can't completely control my sword. Miss, you're too strong. I can't hold back." The young man kindly reminded her. "There's no need to worry. Just go all out." The young girl nodded. The young man did not say anything else. His sword will continue to rise as the space around him started to distort. At this moment, his body started to turn illusory. In the blink of an eye, the young man's body disappeared into thin air. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of the young girl. The divine sword slashed out, its power majestic and shocking. After 3 years of recultivation, The sword had been reborn. The young girl focused and raised her right hand, using her fingers to block the sharp edge of the divine sword. The invulnerable moon-white brilliance scattered the sharpness of the sword. However, the power of the divine sword did not decrease and continued to press down. Beneath the two of them, the ground caved in. Everything that was 10 feet wide was destroyed. In this battle of 10 feet, the two of them controlled their power within 10 feet so that it did not affect anyone else. Compared to the earth-shattering battle between gods and demons, the battle between the two of them did not seem too intense. However, only a true powerhouse could feel the danger of the battle between the two of them. The extremely condensed power became abnormally terrifying. Its destructive power was comparable to an explosion. Even a monarch's body could not withstand it. This battle lasted for half a day. When the sun set in the west, the battle came to an end. The young sword god of Phoenix City was defeated. He lost by half a move. The young girl's cultivation far surpassed the young man's. The difference in talent was not something that could be easily made up for. It was an expected result. The only difference was that 3 years ago, the young man could not even take a single move from the young girl. In just 3 years, the young sword god of Phoenix City was able to fight with the young girl for half a day. I lost. The young man admitted defeat. With a serious expression, he said, "Thank you for your guidance. I will return now. I hope that in the future, I will have the opportunity to ask you for guidance again." The young girl looked at the setting sun in the west and softly said, "I am 21 years old this year." The young man was startled. He said, "What a coincidence. I am the same age as you." The young girl retracted her gaze and gently shook her head. She said, "You are different. You still have a long way to go. Go back. I hope that I can wait until the day you come again." The young man left with doubts and returned to Phoenix City. In the small courtyard, the young girl looked at the setting sun in the west and sighed softly. The setting sun was infinitely beautiful. It was just that dusk was approaching. The young girl walked to the flower bed in the courtyard and continued to tidy the plants. After returning to Phoenix City, the young man went into seclusion again. There was always someone better than him. There was always a sword above a sword. The young man went into seclusion for 8 years. 8 years was just a blink of an eye for the gods and demons. The lifespan of a cultivator was too long. The strongest of them could even live as long as the heavens and earth. In the southwest of the Ueluan Kingdom's capital, a young girl looked to the east. Her tired eyes flashed with regret. In the end, she still could not wait for him. She was 29 years old this year. What a pity. 8 years had passed. His sword should have become stronger. However, she could not see it. 7 days later, in Phoenix City, thunder rumbled. The Phoenix City sword god came out of seclusion. An earth-shattering sword pressure surged wildly and spread from Phoenix City to the entire realm of the gods. It was a powerful sword that could destroy the heavens and destroy the Tao. The Phoenix City sword god came out of seclusion. His body surged with dazzling sword currents. He was like the king of swords. Tens of thousands of swords formed a path in the sky. The young man walked toward the Ueluan Kingdom's capital, ready to challenge the young girl for the 3rd time. In the Ueluan Kingdom's capital, everyone looked at the sky in shock. What a powerful sword! In the void, the young man walked through the void. Every step he took, a sword mark appeared in the void. Within 100 feet of the young man, all the laws of heaven and earth disappeared. Only the Tao of swords remained. At the same time, in the southwest of the capital, there was no sound in the quiet courtyard. It was as if no one knew of the young man's arrival. In a few seconds, the young man walked from Phoenix City to the Ueluan Kingdom. Even the laws of time and space could not stop his strong sword will. In front of the courtyard, the young man descended from the sky and walked forward step by step. The courtyard door opened. The young man walked in and looked inside. In the courtyard, the flowers and grass were neatly trimmed. However, there was no trace of the young girl. The young man stood in front of the courtyard and looked at the quiet courtyard. At first, he was stunned. Gradually, his expression darkened. So that was what she meant. He was late. Chapter 1564. In the capital of the Ueluan kingdom, the Phoenix City Sword God arrived on 10,000 swords. The shocking formation showed the might of the sword god again. However, in the small courtyard in the southwest of the capital city, everything had changed. The young girl had disappeared, and in the end, she did not manage to wait for the young man to arrive. Rivals of a lifetime, confidants of a lifetime, in the same generation, the only two people who could match up to him. The Phoenix City Sword God stared at the empty courtyard in a daze, the light in his eyes gradually dimmed. 8 years later, the divine sword that had yet to be unsheathed would never have the chance to be unsheathed again. The Phoenix City Sword God stepped into the small courtyard, and the sword intent around him dissipated. The aura of darkness surged in the mortal world. Its earth-shattering power had already reached its peak. The Master of Darkness stood in the air in the dark chi. Black chi kept surging around his body. His power had already surpassed the monarch realm. Before reaching the Genesis tier, the strongest god of darkness was only half a step away from reaching the legendary god domain. In the Z-Way galaxy, surrounded by the light of Buddha, a gray-haired woman sat cross-legged, guarding the last light in the human world. It was the final battle between darkness and light. Even though the hope was slim, the last guardian of the human world refused to back down. The huge darkness surrounded the weak light. The darkness had completely recovered, and the light was in imminent danger. Above the mortal realm, the 6 heavens were also affected and began to show signs of abnormalities. Amidst the surging black air, the Master of Darkness, who had already reached the crucial point of breaking through to the Genesis tier, looked toward the 6th heaven, the black air around him becoming more and more astonishing. It was still not enough. He needed more heaven and earth source energies. The source power of heaven and earth in the mortal realm was already unable to satisfy the needs of the Master of Darkness. In order to break through to the Genesis tier, the Master of Darkness turned his gaze toward the 6th heaven. The aura of darkness around his body burst forth and spread toward the 6th heaven. The first to bear the brunt was the God realm. Affected by the darkness aura, the entire God realm began to shake violently. The darkness spread to the entire divine world. Everyone in the divine world was stunned. Not good. In the southern region and the western region of the God world, the rising sun dragon god and the demon lord's expressions hardened at the same time. The two God world sovereigns undid the seals in their bodies, and their explosive power soared to the level of Tao obliteration. As one of the strongest experts in the firmament who was second only to the ancient sovereigns, his strength had reached a new level. In order to protect the firmament, he no longer sealed his cultivation. However, as the two of them unleashed their full cultivation, the space-time of the two domains began to collapse. Clearly, it was difficult for the two domains to withstand such enormous power. In the southwest of the Ueluan kingdom's capital, in a quiet courtyard, the flourishing flowers and plants were affected by the power of darkness. They quickly withered and dissipated. In the courtyard, when the young sword god of Phoenix City saw this, his face immediately turned cold. In the mortal realm, the aura of the god of darkness, who had spread his power of darkness to the 6 heavens, started to rise again. He continued to charge toward the legendary Genesis tier. In front of the Z-Way star zone, Qing Ning, the guardian of the last light in the world, was like duckweed in the rain. She had held on for many years and was about to reach her limit. Human, I've already been merciful by sparing your life until now. Now, it's time to take back what belongs to me. In the endless void, the Lord of Darkness raised his hand, and the dark aura gushed out like raging waves, pressing down on the last guardian of the human world. 100 years ago, I wasn't able to help you in time. 100 years later, I will definitely help you protect this final world. In front of the Z-Way galaxy, Qing Ning let out a long cry. The Buddha's light around her was pushed to the limit. The blood-stained light continued to spread. It merged with the hope of all living beings in a region and fought against the Lord of Darkness. Darkness and light collided. The two powers that were closest to the power of creation collided. The human world was instantly split in half. Darkness and light melted into each other, turning into chaos and dissipating. Is this all you can do? In front of the Z-Way galaxy, the Lord of Darkness snorted coldly. He flipped his right hand, and the power of darkness rose again. This palm will end the human era. A palm that could destroy heaven and earth shot out. Wherever the power of darkness passed, all things dissipated, and the stars were extinguished. Darkness, what a detestable power! At this moment, a cold voice was heard from the end of the void. Before Yi Futian could react, a young man in white appeared in front of the Z-Way segmentum. He waved the divine sword in his hand and blocked the spreading dark power. The divine sword was in its scabbard, but the sword intent was independent. Even though the power of darkness was extremely strong, it couldn't pass through the barrier. Behind, Qin Ning saw the familiar figure in front of her, and her eyes narrowed fiercely. It was him. Although his appearance and aura had changed, she knew that it was him. "It's you!" In the void, the Lord of Darkness was also shocked when he saw the newcomer. Impossible, hadn't he already turned into Tao, and his divine sense had been destroyed? In the seventh heaven realm, in front of a majestic open-air temple, the holy number 1 martial god of the heaven realm stood quietly. He looked at the human world, and a rare look of surprise flashed across his eyes. Not bad. By the looks of it, it won't be long before another Genesis tier appears in this world. At this moment, a divine sun appeared in the void. A dignified voice sounded from the divine sun, and it praised, "Using reincarnation to collect memory fragments and use a new body to give life is indeed an unexpected method. That Lord of the Eastern Celestial Realm is indeed a wise man. This is the first time in history that he has used such a method to create life. Whether this method will succeed in the end is unknown. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had to enter reincarnation himself," the Lord of the Underworld said coldly. "Regardless of whether it succeeds or not, to be able to think of this method, that Lord of the Eastern Celestial Realm is already close to our level. Perhaps, when he returns, he will truly surpass you and me," the god in the divine sun said with emotion. "I look forward to that day." The Lord of the Underworld looked at the human world with an indifferent expression. In the human world, the Master of Darkness and the Phoenix City Sword God faced each other. The battle of reincarnation began again after 100 years. The Master of Darkness, who had recovered to his peak and was trying to break through to the Genesis tier, saw the person in front of him, and his expression became completely cold. He activated all the dark power in his body, wanting to avenge the humiliation from 100 years ago. Around the Phoenix City Sword God, air currents crisscrossed, blocking layer after layer of dark power. The dark power was different from the light power. It was filled with negative emotions, disturbing the mind of a swordsman. However, the heart of a swordsman was unwavering, and it didn't waver for a moment. "You only have power, but it is so empty and empty. You are inferior to her," the young man said coldly. He took a step forward, and his divine sword was unsheathed. Fast, unbelievably fast. The divine sword slashed open the boundary of time and space. The young man of Phoenix City shocked the gods with a single strike. The Master of Darkness's expression became serious. He was about to block when he realized that the opponent in front of him had already disappeared. The young man reached out and grabbed the Master of Darkness's shoulder. His figure was like lightning, and he flew toward a withered large star. The young man waved his hand, and directly threw the Master of Darkness to the large star below. Boom! A terrifying impact force spread out, and the large star that was dead silent immediately shattered into pieces, collapsing into nothingness. The Master of Darkness's figure flew out. It was only one move, and the corners of his mouth were red. "Master of Darkness, you are just SOSO." As he spoke, the Phoenix City Sword God rushed in front of the Master of Darkness. He waved his sword, and a waterfall of dazzling blood splattered. Chapter 1565. At this critical moment, the Phoenix City Sword God descended from the Z-Way galaxy. His shocking cultivation in the sword shocked all the gods and demons in the universe. After a few exchanges, the sky collapsed and the earth collapsed. The body of the Master of Darkness destroyed one life star after another, and he was actually at a disadvantage. It was an unexpected battle. The Phoenix City Sword God's body was surrounded by sword radiance, and he was not afraid of the power of darkness. His sword heart was firm and could not be shaken. In the face of darkness, any trace of fear would become a fatal weakness. The Phoenix City Sword God had practiced swordsmanship for more than 20 years and had experienced a crushing defeat. His sword heart had been honed, and he was no longer the weak young man of the past. In the starry sky, the dark aura that filled the entire world became stronger and stronger. However, the sharp sword radiance was not affected at all. It formed a path of its own and cut open a bright path in the darkness. I didn't expect you to come back after just 100 years. After a series of exchanges, the body of the Master of Darkness turned red several times. He relied on his reconstructed immortal body to withstand the sword radiance and reached out to grab the man in front of him. The Phoenix City Sword God sneered. He turned his sword around and punched out, hitting the Master of Darkness head-on. The fist and the palm collided, and the airwaves shook. In the battle of cultivation, the Phoenix City Sword God was slightly weaker. He took a step back, and the sword radiance came out again. The divine sword slashed through the darkness directly and cut off one of the Master of Darkness's arms. Dazzling red blood splattered all over the sky. The Master of Darkness groaned and took a few steps back. However, the black airflow gathered in the sky, and the splattered blood flowed backward. The broken arm of the Master of Darkness was quickly regenerated, and in the blink of an eye, it was as good as new. Immortal body? The Phoenix City Sword God squinted his eyes. After a moment of surprise, he calmed himself down and took a step forward. He did not believe that there was an immortal body in this world. Even if there was, he would use the sword in his hand to break the indestructible darkness. His battle intent rose, and in a flash, the Phoenix City Sword God was in front of the Master of Darkness. His sword aura was shocking, and it slashed down from the sky. Seeing this, the Master of Darkness's face darkened. Dark airflow gathered from all directions, and he punched out again to shake the divine sword. An intense shockwave rocked the area. The myriad of techniques in the starry skies were all destroyed. The sword light penetrated through the darkness sovereign's body, forcing him to retreat again. The Phoenix City Sword God's sword intent was so sharp that it was shocking. There was nothing it couldn't destroy. The two of them engaged in a fierce battle. Although the Darkness Lord, who had reconstructed his immortal body, was at a disadvantage, he was still undefeated thanks to his terrifying regenerative abilities. In comparison, although the Phoenix City Sword God had a shocking sword will, his body was still weak. Every time he waved his sword, it would consume a lot of energy. Outside of the battle, Qing Ning watched the battle between the two, unable to hide the shock in her heart. He had said that he did not believe in the afterlife, nor did he believe in reincarnation. However, how was he going to explain the person in front of her now? Although his aura and appearance were different, she knew that he had returned. In the battle, thousands of sword lights flashed. The Phoenix City Sword God unleashed a shocking battle prowess, completely suppressing the Lord of Darkness. The Reincarnation Sword God had given up everything, leaving only the sword might that could destroy the world. At this moment, at the end of the void, a beautiful figure in white clothes and white hair rushed over. Suddenly, her body shook, and her consciousness went into a trance. Fragments of memories appeared, and the familiar scenes flashed past like smoke. Tears fell from Mu Qingshue's eyes silently, not knowing why. Fate was merciless. The two of them who knew each other and cherished each other were not fated to be together. The fate of a lifetime passed in the blink of an eye. Tears wet his clothes. In front of the Z-Way galaxy, Mu Qingxue stood still, looking at the strange man in front of him. He did not know why, but his heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. In the battle, the Lord of Darkness knew that his opponent's cultivation had improved greatly. He displayed his destructive power, delaying the battle, hoping to get through the last obstacle. Sensing the Lord of Darkness's intention, the Phoenix City Sword God unleashed all his power, activating the endless sword intent to lock down the battle. Layers of sword lights crisscrossed, using extreme attacks to injure the Lord of Darkness again and again. destruction and rebirth, light and darkness, victory and defeat. Boom. Darkness and light clashed, and the Phoenix City Sword God waved his sword to cut off the aftershock. His figure flashed in front of the Lord of Darkness, grabbing the latter's throat, and turned into a ray of light, crashing into the meteor in the distance. The sky shook violently, and the meteor collapsed. The two figures rushed out, and the Phoenix City Sword God rushed toward the Lord of Darkness crazily. In front of the Lord of Darkness, a black screen appeared, blocking the thousands of sword lights. Arg! After seeing the thousands of sword lights, the Phoenix City Sword God broke through the black screen, and his sword pierced through the Lord of Darkness's body. Blood spurted out, and mist filled the sky. The Lord of Darkness grabbed the divine sword, and despite the blood spurting out, he turned his left palm and attacked back. The palm was earth-shattering, and the Phoenix City Sword God could not stop in time, so he took the palm of the Lord of Darkness head-on. His heart was injured, and the sword lights in the sky shook violently. The Phoenix City Sword God spat out blood, and his figure flew 100 feet away. Not good. Outside the battle, Qing Ning saw that the situation was unfavorable and immediately wanted to help. "Miss, please step back," the Phoenix City Sword God said, and his sword intent spread out, pushing the former back. Qing Ning's expression froze, and she was confused. "I will use the death of darkness to prove my sword." As soon as he finished speaking, in the starry sky, the Feng Qing divine swordsman unleashed all of his sword will. The majestic sword might sublimated to the extreme. A sword that surpassed the plane could not be withstood by the physical body. The body of the Feng Qing divine swordsman began to collapse. The dazzling divine soul, the sword light blazing like the divine sun, the sword that was no longer limited by the body and realm had reached the pinnacle of the world. Life after life, the familiar scene, the fearless swordsman stopped the war with his sword. In the realm of gods, the sword light broke through the restrictions of time and space, like a beam of light that pierced through heaven and earth, and could be seen clearly even from an endless distance. It's him! The imprint of the divine soul could not be changed. In the southern and western regions of the realm of gods, the rising sun dragon god and the demon lord sensed it, and their expressions changed. The Phoenix City Sword God was his reincarnation. At the same time, in the eastern region of the realm of gods, the heavenly lords from the human world opened their eyes and looked at the human world with shock. It was knowing destiny. After 100 years, the familiar aura reappeared. The heavenly lords of the human world came out of seclusion, and their figures appeared in the void, looking at the human world. Knowing destiny is still alive, Mu Qianshang said, and his eyes were filled with excitement. That brat really didn't die, and made me sad for so long for nothing. In the distance, in a celestial mountain, Luo Xing soared into the sky, and looked at the human world, and could not help but curse. In the battle of the human world, the Phoenix City Sword God's sword intent broke through the limits of his body, and his sword power reached the heavens, surpassing the monarch realm, and infinitely close to the legendary realm of the gods. Just at this moment, thunder rumbled in the sky. Lightning and fire descended, appearing out of nowhere. The thunder and fire that swallowed tens of thousands of swords could not shake the body of the swordsman. The strongest sword was not something that the heavenly tribulation could shake. In the next moment, the sword light cut through the heavenly tribulation. The terrifying sword cut through the dark world, and directly divided the starry sky into two. Chapter 1566. In the Z-Way Galaxy, a shocking sword split the darkness apart, shaking the universe. Facing the extreme sword, the Master of Darkness's expression changed slightly. He activated his power of darkness to the extreme, and a huge shadow of a ferocious beast appeared behind him, roaring loudly. The two forces clashed, and the whole world changed color. A huge crack appeared on the chest of the Master of Darkness. Blood and flesh flew everywhere, and white bones could be seen. The black origin pearl appeared, and fine lines appeared. It was obviously affected by the sword intent, showing signs of instability. In the void, the divine sword was attacked by the power of darkness and shattered. In an instant, a white figure flashed past, forming a sword with her fingers, and broke toward the Master of Darkness. Ah! The sword pierced through the pearl, and the air around the Master of Darkness shook. The origin pearl shattered, and a violent aura of darkness surged out, shaking the sky. The Master of Darkness's path to the Genesis tier was ruined. Blood kept flowing out of his mouth, and he couldn't even stand steadily. Master! At this moment, outside the battlefield, a black sword light broke through the sky, carrying the Feng City Sword God, who was about to exhaust his power, and the heavily injured Master of Darkness away. In front of the Z-Way galaxy, the Feng City Sword God looked at the black sword light in the distance and didn't chase after it. After a great battle, the sky was devastated. Almost half of the galaxy was destroyed, and the sky was lost. After a lifetime of sword cultivation, the Feng City Sword God reached the extreme. After his physical body dissipated, the vitality of the Feng City Sword God also dissipated, and he reached the end of his life. Outside the battlefield, Qing Ning looked at the familiar yet strange figure in front of her. She finally couldn't hold back her tears, and they fell. The Feng City Sword God felt it, and he looked at the woman in the distance. The memories of his previous life had disappeared, but the Feng City Sword God still felt that the woman in front of him was very familiar. Goodbye. The life of this world has come to an end. The Phoenix City Sword deity smiled as he bid farewell. Come back quickly. Qing Ning nodded and smiled with tears in her eyes. Just as she finished speaking, the Feng City Sword God's figure in the sky disappeared, returning to heaven and earth. Come back quickly. Qing Ning's tears fell again, and she murmured softly. In the dark abyss, a black sword light flashed past, and the heavens returned with the heavily injured Master of Darkness, looking very anxious. Around the Master of Darkness, the reconstructed origin pearl shattered, and the aura of darkness became extremely violent. Heavens! The Master of Darkness said in a deep voice, I'm going into seclusion to recuperate. Stand guard for me. The heavens replied. The Lord of Darkness went deep into the depths of the abyss of darkness to recuperate. The heavens stood quietly in the abyss, protecting the Lord of Darkness. Heavens, how are the Lord's injuries? At this moment, the God of Plagues appeared and asked. Master's injuries are extremely serious. He has already gone into seclusion. The heavens solemnly replied. A strange look flashed across the God of Plague's eyes. It seemed that his Lord's injuries were more serious than the last time. Heavens, I can see that you are also injured. Leave this to me, you should go and heal your wounds first, the God of Plagues said. The heavens looked back at the end of the dark abyss and nodded. Be careful. God of Plagues nodded and said, Don't worry. After the heavens left, the God of Plagues was the only one standing in the turbulent dark airflow. His gaze was as deep as the abyss. After waiting for a long time, the God of Plagues turned around and walked towards the end of the darkness. At the end of the dark abyss, the Lord of Darkness sat cross-legged and focused on recuperating. Soon, the God of Plagues walked over. He looked at the Lord of Darkness in the heavy restrictions, a strange look flashing across his eyes. At the same time, in the mortal realm, after the Lord of Darkness was seriously injured, the dark aura that filled the world quickly dissipated. Half of the starry sky regained its peace. However, after the darkness, the mortal realm was devastated and extremely bleak. There was no longer any trace of life on the withered planets. The collapsed starry sky was filled with cracks. Huge gaps could be seen everywhere, like the mouth of a ferocious beast, as though it would swallow someone at any time. Sister Qing Ning, will the immortal elder return? In the Z-Way galaxy, on a withered planet, the little gourd sat on Qing Ning's shoulder and asked with tears in its eyes. He will. Qing Ning said softly. He definitely will. In the God realm, the celestial venerables who had left the mortal realm for 100 years looked at the mortal realm with longing in their eyes. No matter how prosperous the God realm was, the mortal realm was their home. Female Supreme, I want to go back. Yin-Er spoke softly. The Chongling Female Supreme looked at the mortal realm. After a long time, she nodded and said, Let's go back. In the distance, Luo Xingchen, Mu Qianshang, and the others looked at each other and saw the determination in each other's eyes. They should go back. All these years, Ji Ming alone had endured too much. Now that Ji Ming had entered the cycle of reincarnation, the mortal realm should be guarded by them. Half a month later, in the God realm, floating islands rose and flew towards the mortal realm. In the southern border of the God realm, in front of the rising sun temple, the rising sun flood god looked to the east. Light flashed across his eyes as he said, "They still went back in the end. The mortal realm is their home." At the side, the moon goddess looked to the east and said calmly. At the end of the dark abyss, the god of plagues stood quietly outside the layers of restrictions. After observing for a long time, he stepped inside. In an instant, layers of restrictions were activated. The light was blinding. The god of plagues waved his hand, and a strange dark power surged and quickly swallowed the power of the restrictions. In the center of the restrictions, the Lord of Darkness who was in seclusion to heal felt it and opened his eyes. The two of them looked at each other. One was shocked, the other cold. The god of plagues reached out and pierced the Lord of Darkness' chest. My lord, do you know why you lost?" The god of plagues looked at the Lord of Darkness and sneered. "Because you absorbed too much of the darkness of human nature. Your greed has blinded your eyes." God of plagues. Blood flowed from the corner of the Lord of Darkness' mouth. He looked at the subordinate who used to be so respectful to him. He never thought that this day would come. But the Lord of Darkness raised his hand and wanted to counterattack. However, his strength was restrained and he could not move even half a step. Greed, impatience, ignorance, betrayal. The darkness of human nature had blinded his dark heart. The Lord of Darkness had forgotten that he was formed by the darkness of human nature. How could he choose to trust? At the end of the dark abyss, betrayal was so ugly. The dark aura around the god of plagues surged and quickly swallowed the original power of the Lord of Darkness. In the sky above the dark abyss, dark clouds rolled. The heavens sensed it and thunder rumbled. God of plagues. At this moment, a furious voice was heard from afar. The heavens who had left and returned rushed over. The dark divine sword was unsheathed and slashed at the god of plagues. The god of plagues raised his hand and blocked the dark divine sword. He looked at the first heavenly king of darkness in front of him and said calmly, "Where is loyalty in the darkness? Heavens, your stupidity has impressed me." With a loud bang, the dark power counterattacked and the dark divine sword was broken. The god of plagues who had swallowed the darkness origin had his cultivation level increased rapidly. He was powerful to an unprecedented level. Chapter 1567. In the dark abyss, an ugly betrayal occurred. The god of plagues devoured his master and rebelled against the master of darkness. With its origin stolen, the master of darkness' silhouette quickly dissipated. At the critical moment, the heavens rushed over to kill the traitor. The two strongest in the dark world fought, but the outcome was worlds apart. After stealing the master of darkness's origin, the god of plagues' power was as violent as a raging wave. He shattered the dark divine sword with one palm. The power of darkness counterattacked. The heavens took a few steps back, their mouths red. The palm was so powerful that even the leader of the four heavenly kings of darkness, the heavens, could not withstand it and was severely injured. Surrender or die. The god of plagues looked at the severely injured heavens. The power of darkness in his palm surged as he said coldly. The heavens wiped off the blood at the corner of his mouth and formed a sword with his fingers. His whole body shone again. Even though he was in the dark world, the first swordsman of the dark world chose to be loyal. He pushed his sword will to the limit. Stubborn. The god of plagues snorted. He took a step forward and appeared in front of the heavens. He slapped the ladder again. The power to destroy the heavens instantly destroyed half of the martial bones of the dark swordsman. Blood splattered and dyed the dark world red. Go! At this moment, the dissipated master of darkness suddenly reappeared and slapped the back of the god of plagues. The sudden palm strike came without warning. The god of plagues let out a muffled groan and staggered. So you're not dead yet? The god of plagues turned around and looked at the master of darkness who had reappeared. His dark aura surged and his terrifying aura continued to rise. Dark world dawn. The god of plagues raised his hand. The power of darkness surged and spread out rapidly. My lord, go! The heavens rushed forward and stood in front of the master of darkness. He gathered the last of his sword will and slashed at the god of plagues. The two forces collided. The heavens' martial bones were shattered. Blood splattered and mist filled the sky. The first swordsman of the dark world looked at the master of darkness behind him. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something. In the end, he only said one word. Go! The master of darkness looked at the heavens who had died in battle. There was not much emotion in his eyes. God of plagues, when I return, you'll know what true darkness is. As he spoke, the master of darkness figure gradually disappeared. The god of plagues frowned as he watched the lord of darkness disappear. In the world of nothingness, on the rugged floating islands, on the road from the realm of gods to the realm of mortals, the powerhouses of the mortal world returned, unable to hide the waves in their hearts. On the floating island at the very front, Mu Qianshang, Luo Xingchen, and the others stood quietly. Their gazes were fixed in the direction of the human realm, their expressions filled with anticipation. We're home, Mu Qianshang softly said. Yes, we're home. Luo Xingchen's eyes flashed with emotion as he replied. In the human realm, in the Ziwei star zone, above the immortal realm, Qing Ning looked at the horizon and sighed. They're finally back. At the end of the starry sky, floating islands appeared one after another. On the floating islands, numerous celestial venerables stood quietly. Powerful auras surged, covering the sky and covering the sun. In the sky above the Ziwei galaxy, thousands of floating islands stopped. The celestial venerables of the mortal realm looked at the changing starry sky with complicated expressions. Welcome back, Qing Ning said as she looked at the celestial venerables in the human realm. Sister Qing Ning. Flew down from the first floating island and said excitedly, I'm back. Qing Ning smiled as she reached out to support the little girl's head. Where's Master? I felt his aura when I was in the god realm. Looked around. Wait a little longer. Your master will be back soon. Qing Ning looked into the distance and said softly, I'm going to find Master. Iner said sweetly. Qing Ning was startled. After a moment, she smiled and said, All right, let's go together. After the celestial venerables of the mortal realm returned, Qing Ning greeted them one by one and left with In. In the distance, the white-robed, white-haired woman quietly looked at the celestial venerables of the mortal realm. Her eyes revealed a thoughtful look. 10 years, in the last remaining domain of the mortal realm, the celestial venerables did their best to repair the immortal realm, preparing to deal with the upcoming calamity. And on a large planet of life in the Ziwei galaxy, Qing Ning brought in one large city after another, looking for traces of Ningqin. In the last pure land of the mortal realm, the people lived and worked in peace. Even in the apocalyptic world, humans still had to survive. Sister Qing Ning, where do you think Master could be? Iner asked. Your master doesn't believe in reincarnation. Now, I don't know how he is living in this world, but I believe that we will find him one day. Qing Ning answered softly. After hearing that, nodded as if she understood. She did not ask any more questions and continued to search. There were more than thousands of planets of life in the Ziwei galaxy. Even though many of them were destroyed in the calamity, there were still countless planets of life left. For 10 years, 20 years, Qing Ning and Tu walked on the numerous planets of life in the mortal realm, hoping to see that familiar figure. However, after more than 20 years, the two of them still could not find any trace of knowing destiny. In the Hui city in the northwestern territory of the Yen country on the Ziwei galaxy, a young man in plain clothes was holding an ancient book in his hand. He was swaying his head as if he was addicted to books. The young man in plain clothes had a delicate appearance. However, he gave off a scholarly aura which made him look a little pedantic. Ning Fan, you said that you have been studying for your whole life. You didn't take the imperial examinations or become an official. What have you learned? At this moment, a woman walked towards him from not far away and sneered. There's beauty in books. There's also a house of gold in books. Ning Fan raised his head and said with a smile. What beauty? A house of gold? Look at that shabby wooden house of yours. How can it be called a house of gold? The woman sneered. Ning Fan was not angry. Ning Fan did not get angry. He just smiled and continued reading. In the northern part of the Yen country, the Wu dynasty and the Yen country had been fighting for a long time. The common people had no way to make a living. In the Huai city, the imperial court recruited soldiers. Ning Fan, who was studying, was forcibly taken away by the imperial court and sent to the military camp for training. Ning Fan, who had never used a weapon since he was young, was not used to the life in the military camp. Every day after training, he would fall asleep immediately. He did not have the time to read the ancient book on his pillow for a few days. He did not even have the time to open it. There were only 10 pages in the ancient book. Each page was engraved with dense and strange words. Ning Fan had been reading it for 20 years, but he still could not understand it completely. At the border of the two countries, in front of the military camp of the Wu dynasty, a beautiful woman dressed in light blue clothes stood quietly. She was looking at the Yen country in front of her. Her eyes flashed with seriousness. The similar scene was like the cycle of reincarnation. People whose fates were intertwined would eventually meet each other. The only difference was that the eldest princess of the Wu dynasty was 30 years old this year. After 100 lives of reincarnation, she finally reached perfection. Eldest princess, it will be winter in a month. Should we retreat temporarily? A young general behind the eldest princess of the Wu dynasty stepped forward and answered respectfully. Retreat. The woman nodded and said. Under the eldest princess of the Wu dynasty's order, the army completely withdrew from the border and temporarily stopped fighting. The retreat of the Wu dynasty also gave the Yen country a chance to breathe. In the military camp of the Yen country, all the soldiers cheered when they heard that the Wu dynasty had retreated. In front of the tent, Ning Fan also heaved a sigh of relief and a smile appeared on his face. Chapter 1568. In the northern border of Yen country, cold winds were blowing. Winter was approaching. In the barracks of the new recruits, 50,000 new recruits were still training day and night. As one of the ordinary recruits, Ning Fan had to train together with 50,000 new recruits every day. Every day he would be exhausted. Ning Fan, who only knew how to read books since he was young, his body was even weaker than an ordinary person's. In the beginning, he was so tired that he could not even lift his fingers after training every day. However, after half a month of training, Ning Fan's body gradually became a lot stronger, and he also became a lot more tanned. At night, the cold wind blew. In the barracks, Ning Fan took out an ancient book from under his pillow and began to read it attentively. The ancient book only had 10 pages, but the words on it were densely carved. Ning Fan carefully studied the words on the ancient book. His eyes were filled with thoughts. Ning Fan, you have been reading this stupid book every day. Have you seen anything? Beside him, a young man who was about the same age as Ning Fan asked. I don't really understand it. Ning Fan shook his head and said, Ever since I can remember, this book has been by my side. However, I can't understand what is written on it. Can you let me have a look? Zhu Yi asked. Ning Fan thought for a while and nodded. All right. Zhu Yi took the ancient book and flipped through it. When he saw the dense and strange ancient words on it, his brows slightly furrowed. Can you understand it? Ning Fan asked. Zhu Yi shook his head and returned the ancient book. Go to bed early. You still have training tomorrow. Ning Fan said with a smile. Zhu Yi nodded and lay down beside him, falling asleep first. Ning Fan read the book for a while with the help of the weak light. Then he blew out the oil lamp and lay down to rest. It was a quiet and ordinary day. It was just like every day for the past half a month. There was no difference at all. The ordinary people were content with being ordinary. There were not too many storms and waves. There was only tranquility day after day. On the second day of training, tens of thousands of soldiers were training with weapons in their hands on the sparring field. Among them, Ning Fan was holding a long spear. Every time he thrusted his spear, he would let out a loud shout. The days of training were boring but also very fulfilling. The soldiers would bleed and sweat but not cry in order to protect their country. In times of war, scholars were useless. Only by picking up the weapons in their hands could they protect the country and home behind them. At the same time, in the northern part of the Yan Kingdom, in the Wu dynasty, Princess Yueling mobilized all the troops and resources of the entire Wu dynasty, preparing to go south after spring. The Wu dynasty was not as powerful as the Yan Kingdom. However, the soldiers of the Wu dynasty were brave and good at fighting. They were much stronger than the Yan Kingdom. The war between the two countries had always been inextricably tied, with both sides winning and losing. However, everything changed after Princess Yueling of the Wu dynasty came to power. Even the old marshal of the Wu dynasty praised Princess Yueling's attainments in the art of war. After several wars, the Wu dynasty had won all of them, changing the situation of the war between the two dynasties. Winter was long. In the northern border of the Yan Kingdom, heavy snow blocked the view. The barracks were filled with snow. The soldiers woke up early to clear the snow. In the bright morning, the soldiers were working in full swing. They did not know that the seemingly tough winter was actually the last tranquility of the Yan Kingdom. After clearing the snow, the soldiers began their training again. Ning Fan and Zhu Yi came to the barracks together. They got to know each other the earliest and had the best relationship. Ning Fan's body was not good but Zhu Yi's was very strong. In the beginning, Ning Fan was so tired that he could not get up after training. It was always Zhu Yi who carried him back to the barracks. As time went by, the two of them became friends who could talk about anything. What was surprising was that after the two of them got to know each other, they realized that they were born on the same day and year. Their life experiences were also very similar. Sometimes, fate was always unpredictable. Ning Fan and Zhu Yi took care of each other. They were content with the present. Neither of them had extravagant hopes for the future, but they were also full of expectations for it. Ning Fan, how glorious would it be when we defeat the Wu dynasty and make great contributions to the war and return home in glory? When they were resting, the two of them sat on the ground. Zhu Yi said while chewing on some dry rations. I hope we don't have to go to war. Ning Fan said softly. People will die in war. Too many people have died in these years. When he was in Huai City, he had seen many people's sons who were sent to the barracks but never came back. A general would die in 100 battles while a warrior would return after 10 years. War would eventually lead to deaths. If we don't go to war, we won't be able to make great contributions to the war. Then we will have suffered so much for nothing. Zhu Yi said while eating the dry rations. Ning Fan smiled and said, if we really go to war, it's already good enough that we can keep our lives. The reason why we are suffering so much now is just so that we can keep our lives in case there is a war in the future. You really have no ambition. Zhu Yi teased. My biggest wish in this life is to read all the famous scrolls in the world. However, it seems like it's impossible now. Ning Fan said with a smile. In the open space of the barracks, the two of them chatted intermittently. Lunchtime had passed and the afternoon training began. The two of them also returned to the troop. The soldiers of Yan country had trained very hard. However, their physiques were naturally not as good as the Wu dynasties. Therefore, their combat power was slightly weaker. However, this did not mean that Yan country was really afraid of the Wu dynasty. The soldiers of Yan country were brave and good at fighting. They were never afraid of war. This was also the biggest support for the people of Yan country to live and work in peace for the past 100 years. The trivial matters of the mortal world were so insignificant that they were not even worth mentioning. However, in the sky above, the wars that determined the rise and fall of the mortal world were constantly happening. After the celestial venerables of the mortal world returned to the mortal world and rebuilt the immortal domain, the greatest wealth that Ning Chen left for the mortal world was the immortal domain, which was gradually becoming more complete with the laws of heaven and earth. In the world of the immortal domain, the four symbols floated up and down. Auspicious clouds lingered around it. Its aura was extraordinary. Even though the power of the newly born great world was still weak, the laws of the immortal domain had become more complete. The power of light was boundless and did not carry the filth of the mortal world at all. It turns out that the reason why knowing destiny reopened the immortal domain was for this day. In the immortal domain, Mu Qianshang looked at the laws of the immortal domain which were becoming brighter and brighter and said, "Only light can fight against darkness." The female venerable of Changling took a step forward and said, "The mortal world after the apocalypse is already extremely filthy. The light is suppressed while the darkness is getting stronger day by day. This is why the experts of the mortal world are so weak. However, now that the immortal domain is gradually becoming complete, we have the capital to fight against the darkness with the help of the power of light in the immortal domain. The wisdom of knowing destiny is really incomparable to that of ordinary people." Mu Qianshang said with a sigh. The female venerable of Changling sighed softly. She looked into the distance, her eyes filled with helplessness. Even someone as intelligent as knowing destiny could only sacrifice himself to leave a glimmer of hope for the mortal world. His gaze would always look further than theirs. However, to fight against the darkness and reverse the great calamity of the world, their power alone was not enough. She hoped that Qing Ning and Ting could find him one day sooner. On the North Star, under the heavy snow, two beautiful women came from afar to the Yen country. Chapter 1569. In the northern border of the Yen kingdom, winter had arrived and everything was covered in snow. In the barracks, the training of the new recruits became more and more arduous. The atmosphere also became heavier as spring approached. The spies in the north had received news from the Wu dynasty that the Wu dynasty was gathering troops and preparing to march down south on a large scale when the spring festival came. This news wasn't good news for the 50,000 new recruits. Although the 50,000 new recruits had improved a lot after 3 months of training, they were still far from the battlefield. After all, war was different from training. The beginning of war meant death. No matter how tough the training was, it could not compare. Ning Fan and Zhu Yi were also very nervous. The two of them had never experienced a war before. Their hearts were filled with fear for the upcoming war between the two dynasties. However, compared to Ning Fan, Zhu Yi, who yearned to make contributions in the war, was a little better. Apart from fear, he also had a trace of anticipation for the war. Just as everyone was either fearful or expectant, spring gradually arrived in the north. The cold winter passed, and everything welcomed the season of recovery. In this early spring, when life was recovering, the Wu dynasty in the north finally began to move. The Wu dynasty had been preparing for winter, and all of its rations and resources were continuously sent to the front lines. After the rations and resources arrived, the Wu dynasty's Grand Princess Yueling led an army of 200,000 soldiers southwards. Their shocking formation shook the world. In the imperial court of the Yen kingdom, the Yen emperor received the news that the Wu dynasty in the north was sending troops south. He was furious and immediately sent the general of the Yen kingdom to lead troops north. At the northern border of the Yen kingdom, in Pianan City, the Yen kingdom's defenders resisted the attack of the Wu dynasty's army with all their might and suffered heavy losses. Seeing that Pianan City was about to fall, Ning Fan and 50,000 new recruits were sent to the battlefield from the military camp not far away from the city. The real war had finally arrived. 200,000 against 50,000. On one side were the elites of the Wu dynasty personally commanded by Princess Yueling, and on the other side were the defeated soldiers of Pianan City, plus the 50,000 new soldiers who had only been trained for 3 months. The serious disparity in combat strength foreshadowed the defeat of this war from the beginning. In Pianan City, thousands of new recruits of Yen country like Ning Fan entered the battlefield. It was their first time witnessing the cruelty of war. Death was so close. In just half a day, more than 5,000 of the 50,000 new recruits had died in battle. Blood dyed the entire city wall red, and corpses piled up in the corners of the city. Many of the new recruits were scared silly when they saw such a cruel scene. Some of them even vomited incessantly due to fear. One of them was Ning Fan. Ning Fan was born ordinary. Other than reading more books than others, he did not have any other outstanding points. Facing the cruelty of war, the fear in his heart was no less than anyone else. After half a day of brutal battle, Ning Fan was so frightened that he could not even stand properly. It was only because Zhu Yi forcefully supported him that he did not fall to the ground. There were quite a number of ordinary recruits like Ning Fan. After a great battle, they were scared out of their wits. The general guarding the city felt powerless when he saw the 50,000 recruits in such a pathetic state. He had also been a recruit until today and understood the long and painful process of growing up. However, the Wu dynasty would not give these people time to grow up. If these 50,000 recruits could not overcome the fear of war, Pinyin City would be breached in at most 5 days. As night fell, the soldiers patrolling the city walked back and forth with torches in their hands. They could not hide their nervousness. The night was always terrifying. Especially after they'd experienced a horrifying battle, the soldiers in the city didn't dare relax in the slightest, and they were tense at all times. In the middle of the night, it was Ning Fan's and Zhu Ye's turn to patrol the city. The two of them got up from their tents, put on their armor, and took their weapons. Then they went to patrol the city. The middle of the night was the most exhausted time for a person. Most of the soldiers in the city had already fallen asleep. The tense state of mind of the 50,000 new recruits made them even more exhausted. At this moment, in front of the city, several black figures leaped onto the city tower. With a slash of their curved blades, they killed the soldiers on the tower one after another. Each of the 11 black figures had extraordinary strength. In just a few breaths' time, they killed all the soldiers on the tower. Why is it so quiet? In the city, Zhu Yi, who was patrolling, looked at the city tower not far away and said, "Isn't it good to be quiet? It means that nothing has happened." Ning Fan followed Zhu Ye's gaze and said, "Something's not quite right." Zhu Yi looked at the city tower and said seriously, "It's too quiet." All of a sudden, several black figures dashed across the night sky. Each of them held a curved blade in their hand, and they quickly killed all the soldiers who stood in their way. "Something's wrong. Someone is attacking the camp. Open the city gate." Zhu Yi shouted when he saw the numerous black figures. Zhu Ye's voice resounded in the darkness. The soldiers looked at the city tower and immediately went forward to stop them. Under the night sky, thousands of soldiers went forward with weapons in their hands, trying to stop the 11 men in black from opening the city gate. However, it was already too late. 11 men in black who were highly skilled in martial arts killed the soldiers who were guarding the city gate and opened it. At the next moment, a command arrow flew into the sky and exploded into a dazzling firework. Not far away from the north of Pinyin City, 3,000 iron cavalrymen had been waiting for a long time, ready to set off at any time. The moment the command arrow flew into the sky, Grand Princess Yuling's eyes flashed with light. She waved her hand and moved out. All of a sudden, the 3,000 iron cavalrymen rushed out like a flood of molten iron, heading towards Pinyin City. Meanwhile, the 11 men in black who were highly skilled in martial arts were guarding the city gate with all their might, buying the most precious 7 minutes for the 3,000 iron cavalrymen to arrive. As the iron cavalrymen trampled on the ground, the faces of all the new recruits of Yen country were filled with fear. In the pitch-black night, not even the moonlight could be seen. The 3,000 iron cavalrymen rushed into the city from afar. This was the beginning of the massacre. As the curved blade slashed across, a waterfall of blood bloomed. It was so beautiful that it was intoxicating. The glory of life bloomed so brilliantly at the last moment. Every soldier was trying their best to fight back just to survive. In front of the 3,000 iron cavalrymen, Yuling, who was clad in silver armor, wielded her curved blade and slaughtered a path of blood. Wherever the blade passed, no one survived. Ning Fan, who was scared out of his wits, stood there blankly, unable to move. The sharp blade of the curved blade was like the scythe of the grim reaper, mercilessly reaping lives. "Be careful!" At one side, Zhu Yi saw what happened and immediately pounced on Ning Fan, pushing him to the ground. The curved blade slashed across Zhu Yi's shoulder, drawing a waterfall of blood. On the war horse, Yuling frowned. She patted the horse's back and grabbed the reins with one hand. Then, she slid down from the horse and swung her blade at the two of them. "Be careful!" When Ning Fan, who was pushed to the ground, saw the incoming blade light, he forgot about his fear. He hugged Zhu Yi and rolled on the ground, dodging the blade light. In order to survive, the two most ordinary new recruits of Yen country kept struggling. Their bodies were covered in mud and they looked extremely miserable. Yuling's blade missed its target. She swung her body and returned to the horse's back. Then, she pulled the reins with one hand. The war horse neighed and raised its front hooves, trampling on the two of them. Ning Fan and Zhu Yi could not react in time. As the war horse trampled on them, their mouths instantly turned red. On top of the horse, one of them was slaughtering while the other was seeking to survive. They had different destinies, but they were also fighting against their destinies. Chapter 1570. In Pinyin City, the Wu dynasty's 3,000 cavalrymen broke through the city. Blood flowed like a river, and corpses piled up like mountains. The 50,000 recruits looked so inexperienced in the face of the 3,000 most elite cavalries of the Wu dynasty. Before they could organize an effective counterattack, they were quickly defeated. Outside Pinyin City, the 200,000 soldiers of the Wu dynasty arrived soon after. Their devastating offensive washed the entire city in blood overnight. More than 90% of the 50,000 Yen Kingdom recruits who had trained hard for more than 3 months were lost overnight. By the time they withdrew from Tianan City, there were less than 5,000 left. Among the 5,000 defeated soldiers, Ning Fan and Zhu Yi, who were lucky enough to survive in the hands of Grand Princess Yuling, retreated with the rest of the troops. Only when the sky was bright did they stop and rest. Both of them had suffered heavy injuries. Grand Princess Yuling's skills were extraordinary. If it weren't for their good luck, they probably wouldn't have been able to leave the city alive. In the wilderness, Ning Fan and Zhu Yi sat back to back, panting heavily. "Thank you." The two of them spoke at the same time. Their expressions immediately froze and they could not help but laugh involuntarily. "That was close." She said. "Yes." Ning Fan said with lingering fear. "I almost died in that woman's hands." Speaking of which, the Grand Princess of Wu Dynasty is really beautiful. She said. Ning Fan chuckled and said, "You're about to lose your life, but you can still pay attention to these things. Men, other than building their careers, don't they only think about women?" Zhu Yi said matter-of-factly. "And books?" Ning Fan took out the ancient book from his bosom and said. Zhu Yi turned around and saw the ancient book in the former's hand. He said in surprise, "You actually still have this book with you?" Ning Fan smiled and said, "This is also one of my few hobbies. No wonder people say that scholars are all bookworms. I think you've really become stupid from reading too much." Vermilion Bird snappily said. Just as Ning Fan and the 5,000 remnant soldiers were taking a break, 2 beautiful ladies stood quietly on the wasteland in the distance. They looked at the scene in front of them with complicated expressions. It's war again. It's already at this point in time, but there are still endless battles in the human world. Was a little puzzled as she asked. "Where there are people, there will be fights." Qing Ning sighed softly and said, "Let's go." Nodded and continued walking forward. The two of them left. In the wilderness, the 5,000 remaining soldiers of the Yen Kingdom rested for a quarter of an hour before continuing their journey. The loss of Pinyin City was a huge loss to the Yen Kingdom. It meant that the Yen Kingdom's door was opened and the war would spread to the Yen Kingdom. On the second day after Pinyin City was broken, Princess Yuling led the army south to attack the city. The Wu dynasty came with great momentum, and all of their elites had come out. The war between the two dynasties that had lasted for 100 years was about to come to an end in this generation. The great general of the Yen Kingdom, Xiao Jin, led an army of 300,000 to the north to stop the Wu dynasty's attack. However, the well-prepared army of the Wu dynasty, led by Princess Yuling, defeated the 300,000 troops of the great general of the Yen Kingdom. Within a month, they had conquered 10 cities and defeated the Yen Kingdom's defenders. The 5,000 new soldiers that had been routed from Pianan City had grown rapidly in the successive battles. However, after one battle after another, less than 2,000 of them had survived. The cruelty of war was undeniable. The Yen kingdom is going to perish. In front of a dilapidated city, looked at the scorched earth that had been burned by the flames of war. Even though she was used to seeing the change of dynasties, she could not help but feel emotional. Beside her, Qing Ning looked at Princess Yueling in front of the Wu dynasty's army camp in the distance. Her eyes flashed. She and had followed Princess Yueling for several months and felt that this woman was more and more like someone. Fan Lingyue, the talented military counselor of the Northern Meng imperial court. Sister Qing Ning, is this Princess Yueling the reincarnation of that military counselor? Looked away and asked. Very similar. Qing Ning nodded. She did not know if it was a coincidence, but when Ning Chen and Fan Lingyue first met, Fan Lingyue had used the name Yueling. Then why haven't we seen Master? There was a hint of anxiety in Tina's eyes. They had been searching for more than 20 years, but they still could not find any trace of their master. Maybe we've overlooked something. Qing Ning's expression turned serious. She looked at the battered earth of the Yen kingdom and said, all this time, we've been paying attention to those geniuses or martial arts experts, but we've neglected the most ordinary people. Do you still remember what your master yearned for the most? Ordinary. Tina's heart stirred as she said. On the battlefield, the Wu dynasty and the Yen kingdom's armies clashed again. The 300,000 Yen kingdom's army was defeated again and again by the tens of thousands of Wu dynasty's cavalry. The news of the Yen kingdom's defeat spread to the imperial city of the Yen kingdom. The officials were terrified, and the Yen emperor was shocked. Negotiate peace. After a series of defeats, the Yen kingdom decided to negotiate peace with the Wu dynasty in exchange for a chance to breathe. However, when the proposal reached Princess Yueling's ears, she immediately rejected it. It really suits Fan Lingyue's temperament. As a bystander, Qing Ning watched the battle and could not help but sigh. When the Great Xia and the Northern Meng imperial court were at war, the Northern Meng had fought all the way to the imperial city of the Great Xia, not accepting any compromise or negotiation. Unfortunately, in this era, the Wu dynasty had Fan Lingyue, but the Yen kingdom had no Jiming Marquis. Sister Qing Ning. At this moment, ran to her from afar and said excitedly, I saw someone who looks very similar to Master. Qing Ning's expression changed when she heard that. The two of them left quickly and headed to the military camp of the Yen kingdom. In the military camp, an ordinary young man was no different from thousands of soldiers, patrolling and training. In the last life of the 100 reincarnations, Qing Ning and found the knowing destiny state. Looking at the young man in the military camp from afar, tears welled up in their eyes uncontrollably. It's him, Qing Ning said with tears in her eyes. He was actually so ordinary in this life. He was so ordinary that they almost missed it. I'll bring Master here. After getting confirmation, said excitedly. No. Qing Ning reached out her hand to stop She shook her head gently and said, it's not easy for him to live an ordinary life. Let's not disturb him. The Wu dynasty's army is here. A stone stirred up 1,000 waves. In the military camp, Ning Fan and the others quickly took their weapons and prepared to fight the enemy. They're here. At the summit of the heavens, in front of the majestic divine palace, black feathers fluttered in the wind. The eyes of the number one devil god of the heaven realm suddenly turned solemn. He stared at the front and devil chi surged out of his body. It was extremely powerful. In front of him, sword light flashed. A young man in luxurious green robes walked over. He carried a sword on his back and ancient swords were humming softly. The king was fearless. He broke the rules of time and space. His sword intent was shocking. He broke through the unsurpassable boundary between humans and gods and arrived at the summit of the heavens. A heavenly pride of the generation. In the void, the divine sun descended from the heavens. Within the divine sun, a dignified figure appeared. He looked at the swordsman below with a respectful expression. He was not the reincarnation of an immortal or devil. He did not have a heaven-defying inheritance. He was able to reach his current level with his own strength. Throughout the ages, there was no one like him. Chapter 1571. At the peak of the heavens, the king's sword appeared. The supreme sword power shook the 9 heavens and 10 earths. The strongest sword in the mortal world surpassed the gods and demons. The sword intent broke through the restrictions of time and space and approached the domain of the gods. In front of the towering divine palace, the Nether King stood quietly. His black feathers fluttered in the wind. The strongest martial god of the heaven realm and the strongest sword god of the mortal world crossed time and space and finally met. They didn't say much as it was useless. Their demonic and sword auras rose. An indescribable pressure spread. The peak of the heavens began to shake. Please. The sword rack flew down. Prince Yen grabbed the green and red swords and slowly pulled them out. Swordsmen of the mortal world, don't disappoint the gods. The Nether King raised his hand. Divine flames surged out like raging waves. The terrifying power shook the heavens and earth, burning the peak of the heavens red. The strongest demonic god of the heaven realm, the absolute existence that looked down on the 9 heavens and 10 earths. He created the world and now his demonic might reappeared. As soon as the divine flames appeared, boundless demonic might covered the sky and earth. Even the laws of the heaven realm couldn't withstand the indescribable divine might. The earth collapsed and the sky turned upside down. In front, the 2 swords in the king's hands also displayed shocking sharpness. Endless sword, intense sword into the sky. In the world-shaking demonic might, it formed a world of its own. The swords hummed and moved against the heavens. The king moved. The swords opened the demonic world. 2 shocking sword lights broke through the divine flames and slashed toward the demonic god. The Nether King was as still as a mountain. He flipped the hand of God and blocked the 2 sharp sword lights. At the same time, the divine flames counterattacked and attacked the king in the sword world. The rumbling shook the heavens and earth. The endless divine flames kept attacking the sword world. After a moment of stalemate, the sky shook violently. The divine flames broke through the sword world's defense and blasted toward the king. The divine flames covered the king. Sand filled the sky. In the sand, a faint yellow sword light appeared and blocked the divine flames. The sand sword glowed. The absolute sword pressure protected the king's body. Not bad. The demonic god opened his mouth. His palm energy rose again. Instantly, the demonic might shook the heavens. The mountains moved and the earth moved. In the shocking demonic aura, thunder surged. The power to destroy the world quickly destroyed the laws of the world and descended from the sky. Sword sound, flying swan. Thunder and lightning descended, and the king made his move. The 2 swords hummed softly, splitting the earth and splitting the sky. Sword radiance crisscrossed and howled madly, shaking the world. The sound of the sword shook the thunder. The 2 forces clashed in the sky, turning the top of the heavens into chaos. When the 2 moves collided, the king took the demon god's might head-on without falling into a disadvantageous position. The battle between the demonic god and the sword god caused the sky to change color. Outside the battle, the divine sun rose and fell as the deities watched the battle. An extraordinary swordsman was actually able to withstand the might of a demonic god. After the first 2 moves, the underworld king lightly exerted force under his feet. In an instant, dazzling divine light erupted. The pure and holy brilliance illuminated the 9 heavens and 10 earths, purifying everything. A deity and a demonic cultivator, the number 1 martial god of the 9 heavens, displayed the strongest demonic god might. Divine light spread out, and all things disappeared. Wherever the divine light passed, even the rules of the great path were completely purified. Unparalleled divine might, surpassing the boundaries of gods and demons. At the beginning of the world's creation, there was no distinction between gods and demons. Divine might spread out, and the 2 swords in the king's hands trembled, showing signs of not being able to hold on. Prelude to the Immortal Sword, Human Chapter. The king roared, and a prelude played on the sword. The sound of the sword shook, and all forms of life were transformed into thousands of sword intents. Divine light and sword melody collided in the heavens and earth. Divine might shook the heavens, and the king's hands turned vermilion red. In the face of the divine might, the legendary sword of the mortal world was damaged for the first time. The two swords were dyed red, and cracks appeared. Green and red breath together, absolute chi. The king brushed the two swords with both hands, and used the blood shepherd sword to repair the sword cracks. Then, the two swords flew out, intertwined, and turned into blazing meteors, rushing toward the king in front. The green and red swords fell from the sky with shocking sword might, causing the wind and clouds to change color. In the face of an unprecedented opponent, the underworld king's expression did not change at all. He raised his left palm slightly, and a fierce wind surged out. Boom! The wind blocked the two rainbows, and the two swords were restrained, unable to move an inch forward. At this moment, the king in the sword world in front waved his hand, and sand gathered, and a long sword appeared, breaking through the air. The three swords appeared at the same time, and the sword power multiplied. The underworld king's eyes narrowed, and he raised his right palm, blocking the sand sword that broke through the air. The violent impact spread out, and under the underworld king, the earth cracked, and the seven ultimate temple also shook. In the moment of the stalemate, the king moved, and in an instant he rushed to the front of the demon god. The king held the sword, and the sand sword's power increased by 30%. The sword power rose, and the demonic power around the demon god was impacted and scattered violently. Oh! The underworld king retreated, and after half a step, he stabilized his body. After half a step, the underworld king's body surged out, and the wind and waves rolled, and he counterattacked strongly. The king retreated, and the three swords returned. The sky was filled with raging waves that swept over, endless and boundless. Boom! The demonic power counterattacked, and the king's hand holding the sword was dyed red again, and the sand in the sky was dyed red. Prelude to the Immortal Sword, Earth Chapter. 100 feet away, the king stopped, and the three swords sounded, and the earth rumbled. The king's sword displayed its immortal power again, and under the two, the earth rose, and the sword's sound broke through the air. The sword's sound had no beginning and no end, and even the demonic power was unstoppable. The underworld king closed his eyes and felt the sword's sound that filled the world. He raised his palms slightly, and the earth turned into a barrier, blocking the sword intent one after another. The demonic power was endless, and the way of the sword was boundless. The violent shock wave shook, and the thousands of swords in the sky were instantly destroyed. The demonic power was unshakable. Even though it was said that the sword in the human world had surpassed the limit of gods and demons, it was still at a disadvantage when facing the number one demon god of the nine heavens realm. 3 swords equal to heaven, life and death contract. The demonic power impacted, and the sword realm shook. The sword intent around the king rose again, and the 3 swords spiraled into the air, turning into a huge vortex. Then, the swords fell like rain. The swords intertwined endlessly. The moment the sword and demonic power collided, the king clenched his right hand, and a black brilliance filled the air, and an ancient sealing sword appeared. The king held the sword, and in an instant he was in front of the demon god. The abyss condensation appeared, and the 4 swords came out at the same time. The sword intent rose again, and the sealing sword devoured the demon god's demonic aura, and pierced the demon god's chest. Amazing swordsman, your sword angered the god. The demon god reached out and grabbed the abyss condensation sword. Blood flowed out, dyeing the sealing sword red. The demon god was injured, but the abyss condensation sword was also blocked by the demonic power, and it was difficult for it to advance. Seeing the blood, the god's eyes flashed with admiration and coldness at the same time. An earth-shattering palm came out. The demonic power attacked, and the king was surrounded by sand. The sand's sword protected its master, blocking the demonic power. However, the demonic power was too strong, and it could not be blocked by a single sword. The sound was earth-shattering, and the sand dissipated. The demonic power's palm landed on the king's chest. The palm was deadly, and vermilion blood splashed all over the sky. The king's figure flew out, smashing one divine pillar after another. The king was seriously injured, and the situation of the battle took a turn for the worse. Thousands of feet away, the king stopped his retreat, and the abyss condensation sword sank into the ground, supporting his seriously injured body. The king's green clothes were stained with blood. The invincible legend of the human world showed signs of defeat. "Swordsman, your name?" The Lord of the Abyss asked seriously, his body surging with divine flames. "Xia Yan." Chapter 1572. At the summit of the heavens, the king showed signs of defeat. His green clothes were dyed red. The demonic god's divine flames rose again, wanting to end the legend of the sword in the mortal world. How can the king's sword be defeated? The king was unyielding. The sword propped up his body, and the sealing sword displayed astonishing power. Black light spread out, devouring everything. The divine flames followed, burning the sky and boiling the sea. Everywhere one looked, heaven and earth changed color. The red sea of fire even burned the sky. The demonic god's power shook the 9 heavens and 10 earths. The divine flames pressed down. The king shouted, and his sword opened the forbidden martial world. With one slash, 10,000 Daos were turned into nothingness. One sword forbidden martial, no Dao in the world. The black forbidden martial world and the red divine flames clashed. The sealing sword swallowed the 9 heavens' divine flames and blocked the fatal palm. The king's sword heart was unshakable. The king's battle intent rushed into the sky like a huge wave, piercing through the sky and dazzling the world. 4 swords move the world, heaven and earth fall together. Green and red flew in the sky, and the sand sword pierced the ground. The mortal world sword might appeared, destroying heaven and earth. Demons were innate, formed by the primal chaos. Swords were acquired, tempered thousands of times. When demons and swords met, the sun and moon both moved. The king held the sword, sealing heaven and earth. Heaven, earth, and man. The sword's power was boundless, and gods and demons were shocked. In front of the divine palace, facing the extreme sword, the demonic god's eyes darkened. He raised his eyebrows and held wind and thunder with both hands. They were shocked to see violent wind and thunder descend from the sky, gathering on the demonic god's palms. Unparalleled divine power, wind and thunder surged, whistling together, illuminating the summit of the heavens. Tens of thousands of gods were frightened. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the 4 swords shook the wind and thunder, and yin and yang were out of balance. In the chaotic heaven and earth, the void collapsed one after another, destroyed by the power of the demonic god. However, what was shocking was that the heaven and earth that had just been destroyed was instantly restored. The power of creation accompanied the destruction, born from the same source. In the heaven and earth, after a violent collision, green and red flew down, and the sand sword scattered. The terrifying impact added to the king's body, but he was unwilling to take half a step back, forcibly withstanding the demonic god's power. On the abyss sword, drops of blood dripped down. The sealing sword was stained with the king's blood. Have you reached your limit? God of the mortal world swordsman, but it's time to end it. In front of the divine palace, the Nether King raised his hand and raging waves surged. Each wave of demonic might was stronger than the last, crushing the great Tao laws and destroying everything. The god of creation, the god of destruction, and the number 1 martial god of the heaven realm had used their ultimate moves once again. They were about to end this heaven-defying battle for mankind. In the end, humans were unable to defy the gods. Even with the passage of time and the collapse of the heavens and earth, the outcome could not be changed. Behind the king, there was no longer any king's sword in the empty sword rack. The 4 swords had already been used, but it was still difficult to blaspheme the king's face. The battle shocked the world. The power of the demon god surpassed the path of heaven's destruction. Even though Wang Jian had surpassed the limits of the human world, it was still difficult to shake the power of God. The dripping blood symbolized the beginning of Wang Jian's defeat. According to the legend of the sword in the human world, facing the strongest demon god of the heaven realm since ancient times, it was also the same as the countless heaven-defying people since ancient times. It was impossible to change the final outcome. It wasn't that the kings weren't outstanding enough. It was just that the existence of the demonic god had already surpassed everything. It had been undefeated since ancient times and stood at the peak of the heavens. In front of the divine palace, the demon god who had gathered all of his power pressed down with his right palm. All of a sudden, a monstrous wave came crashing down. The overwhelming devil might even covered the light of the divine sun in the 9 heavens. In the divine sun above the heavens, the god who was watching the battle let out a soft sigh. Then he turned around and left, returning to the 8 heavens. He knew that the swordsman of the human world had still lost in the end. Even though it was very short, there was a moment when he seemed to have seen the hope of mankind defying the heavens. However, everything had ended. The battle against the gods had come to an end. At the same time, on the purple star of the heaven realm in the human world, the Wu dynasty was invading the south. Yan country was in danger. In the face of the Wu dynasty's iron hooves, the army of Yan country was defeated again and again. They almost had no power to resist. Ning Fan and Zhu Yi followed the army and returned to the last natural moat of Yan country, the Heaven Territory Pass. After going through one battle after another, the army of Yan country suffered heavy casualties. Ning Fan and Zhu Yi who survived were promoted to the rank of Decanus and Centurion respectively. In the Heaven Territory Pass, the remaining 100,000 soldiers of Yan country were guarding the first pass of the Yan country, resisting the Wu dynasty's iron cavalry. 300 li away, the army led by Grand Princess Yuling arrived. The army stopped and set up camp in front of the Heaven Territory Pass. Facing the first pass of Yan country, Grand Princess Yuling was not in a hurry to attack. Instead, she chose to rest and reorganize temporarily. Day after day, she would shoot arrows into the pass. Each arrow was tied with a white ribbon. On the white ribbon, there was a letter of persuasion to surrender. Whoever surrenders and opens the gate would be rewarded with 1,000 taels of gold and the title of Marquis of 10,000 households. There were already signs of Yan country's demise. In the city, the remaining 100,000 soldiers and defeated generals were also in a state of panic. In addition to the letters of persuasion that could be seen everywhere in the city, everyone was even more terrified. Ning Fan, Yan country is probably going to perish. In the camp, Zhu Yi who was injured in the battle sighed softly. Don't think too much. Rest well and recover. Ning Fan bandaged the knife wound on his arm and answered. Ning Fan, you need to make plans for your future. Zhu Yi remained silent for a long time and reminded him. Ning Fan's expression was slightly stunned. Future? What do you mean? Nothing. Zhu Kei shook her head. Ning Fan did not think too much and continued to bandage her wound. Outside the Heaven Territory Pass, Grand Princess Yuling stood quietly. She had been waiting for several days. Her expression did not show any signs of anxiety. Your Highness, someone in the pass has sent a letter to us. At this moment, a young general approached her with a secret letter in his hand and said respectfully. Grand Princess Yuling received the letter. After reading it, the corners of her lips curved into a cold smile. The day has finally arrived. Late at night, dark clouds covered the sky. The soldiers guarding the pass began to change their guard. At this moment, a group of iron cavalry of the Wu dynasty arrived outside the pass under the cover of the night. Grand Princess Yuling was leading the group with a heavy sword in her hand. She slashed at the giant gate of the Heaven Territory Pass. Boom! The sound of a violent collision was heard. The heavy iron and wood gate let out an ear-piercing sound. Behind the gate, the wooden bolts cracked one after another. They could not withstand the terrifying force. At this moment, behind the group of iron cavalry, a group of war horses pulled a huge round log and charged towards the iron and wood gate in front of them. Boom! An even more terrifying sound of vibration was heard. The iron and wood gate opened. Due to the inertia, the huge round log continued to move forward, directly knocking away the soldiers of Yan country behind them. Inside the Heaven Territory Pass, The soldiers of Yen country who were guarding the gate were shocked. Why did this happen? Behind them, the iron cavalry of the Wu dynasty rushed into the Heaven Territory Pass and began the massacre again. In the camp, Ning Fan woke up from his deep sleep and quickly went out of his tent to take a look. Inside the Heaven Territory Pass, flames were burning the sky. Panic was everywhere. Seeing this, Ning Fan hurriedly returned to the tent at the side and said anxiously, "Zhu Yi, get up quickly. The army of the Wu dynasty is coming." However, the tent was already empty. There was not a single person inside. Ning Fan's face was filled with shock. He ran out of the tent again and searched everywhere. However, he could no longer find any traces of Zhu Yi. Inside the Heaven Territory Pass, the Iron Cavalry of the Wu dynasty massacred the remaining soldiers of Yen country. The faces of the soldiers of Yen country were filled with despair. They could no longer see a trace of hope. It was a bloody night. Blood flowed like a river in the Heaven Territory Pass and corpses piled up into mountains. In the imperial court of Yen country, the Yen emperor received the news of the battle. His face was filled with shock and he slumped on the dragon throne powerlessly. The end of Yen country. Chapter 1573. In the mortal world, the Yen kingdom and the Wu dynasty's armored cavalry trampled over every inch of the Yen kingdom's territory. After the Tianyu Pass was broken, the Yen kingdom could no longer defend itself. The destruction of the Yen kingdom was a foregone conclusion. Soldiers from all over the Yen kingdom were heading to the capital city, ready to make a last stand. However, reality was always cruel. The army heading for the capital of the Yen kingdom was quickly defeated by the elite cavalry of the Wu dynasty. After barely holding on for 3 months, the capital of the Yen kingdom was breached, and the Yen kingdom was officially destroyed. After the fall of the Yen dynasty, the Wu dynasty moved its capital, and its territory multiplied. In the next 10 years, the cavalry of the Wu dynasty fought in all directions and gradually unified the eastern region of the Ziwei Star. As a result, the name Princess Yueling spread throughout the world. However, what was unexpected was that 3 years after the Yen kingdom unified the eastern continent, Princess Yueling began to gradually relinquish her power. She was still a young emperor and was in a semi-retired state. Another year later, the eldest princess of the Wu dynasty disappeared completely. No one knew where she was. Some people said that Princess Yueling was tired of the court battles and didn't want to care about the court's affairs anymore, so she retreated into the mountains. Others said that Princess Yueling got sick of the long years of war and left the palace to seek medicine from the immortal sections. In short, the Moon Spirit Grand Princess, who once shook the entire eastern continent, had disappeared. He was the greatest figure in the history of the Wu dynasty. He had conquered a huge territory for the Wu dynasty. He was not like an emperor, but he was far more powerful than one. However, there were still many things that no one knew the truth about. For example, how did the Wu dynasty break through the gate of the Yen kingdom's Tianyu Pass? The Tianyu Pass was known as the first pass in the world. No one had been able to break through it for thousands of years, but it was easily broken through by the Wu dynasty's iron cavalry. And in the imperial court of the Wu dynasty, there was one more Marquis, who was full of glory and splendor. In the 15th year after the fall of the Yen kingdom, a man holding a sword came to the capital of the Wu dynasty. The man was dressed in plain clothes and held an ancient book in his hand. He looked very young and didn't look like he had passed the age of no doubts. The man's name was Ning Fan. On the day when the capital of Yen country was breached, he began to practice the sword. His life's goal was to kill one person, Zhu Yi. After practicing the sword for 15 years, his scholarly aura had completely changed. His entire body was like a sword, sharp and threatening. However, Ning Fan was still holding the ancient book in his hand. He had never given up on his lifelong obsession. At the same time, in the Zhu estate, Zhu Yi, who had also passed the age of 40, had undergone a great change in appearance and temperament. On the sparring field, Zhu Yi stood quietly, his muscles bulging with explosive power. Around him, 8 or 9 soldiers attacked mercilessly with sabers and swords. However, when the Wu dynasty soldiers attacked, Zhu Yi also moved. He rushed forward and sent 2 soldiers flying with a punch and a kick. 15 years had passed, and everything had changed. Not only Ning Fan, even Zhu Yi also began to practice martial arts. Although the 2 of them had already passed the best age to practice martial arts, due to their astonishing perseverance, they still managed to achieve remarkable results. In the imperial city of the Wu dynasty, Ning Fan walked towards the Zhu mansion. Behind him, In-er and Qing Ning followed from a distance. They looked at the man in front of them. For more than 10 years, they had been watching silently. "Master, what are you planning to do?" In-er asked. "Murder," Qing Ning said softly. "Betrayal is always the most unforgivable." Zhu Yi frowned. "But he's already the Marquis of the Wu dynasty. There are many guards in the mansion. Can Master kill him? You should know your master's character very well. Even if he knows that it's impossible, he won't give up. Even though he's already a mortal in this life, his character hasn't changed." Qing Ning answered. "Should we help Master?" In-er asked. "There's no need." Qing Ning shook her head. "Let's just watch quietly." Outside the Zhu mansion, the sky gradually darkened. The lanterns were lit and the imperial city became quiet. 300 steps away from the Zhu mansion, Ning Fan stood quietly, looking at the mansion in front of him with a calm expression. Inside the Zhu mansion, the lights were extinguished one after another. The hour was approaching and the entire imperial city became silent. Outside the mansion, Ning Fan, who had been standing quietly for 4 hours, finally moved. He revealed himself and dashed into the Zhu mansion. In the backyard of the Zhu mansion, Zhu Yi, who had been resting, suddenly opened his eyes and stood up. At this moment, a cold sword light suddenly pierced through the air. Its sharpness was blinding. Zhu Ye's body rolled down from the bed. When he landed on the ground, he stomped on the ground and launched a counterattack. When the powerful fist wind approached him, Ning Fan twisted his body and dodged the attack. Then, he swung his cold sword and attacked again. At such a close distance, fists and kicks collided with weapons. Every move was filled with danger. Similarly, when cultivators in the mortal world put their lives on the line, their killing intent was fully displayed. "It's you." After exchanging a few moves, Zhu Yi saw the blurry appearance of the person in front of him under the dim moonlight. His expression turned grim and he said, "You didn't expect me to still be alive, did you?" Ning Fan took a step forward and grabbed Zhu Ye's shoulder. Then, he swung his cold sword at him with deadly force. Zhu Yi could not dodge in time. His left shoulder was cut by the sword and blood splattered everywhere. Boom! At the same time, Zhu Yi broke free from the restraints and threw a punch at Ning Fan's chest. A muffled groan was heard. Ning Fan took 3 steps back and the corners of his mouth turned red. "There's an assassin! There's an assassin!" The commotion in the backyard woke up the female members of the mansion. Their cries attracted a large group of guards. "You and I are friends. Why do you have to go to this extent?" Zhu Yi looked at the person in front of him and said in a deep voice, "You don't deserve to be called a friend." Ning Fan said coldly. He suppressed his injuries for the time being and took a step forward, dashing forward again. The comrade in arms who had once entrusted their lives to each other were now facing each other in life and death. There was no turning back just because of that unforgivable betrayal. In the backyard, a large group of guards arrived. They broke open the door and charged into the room with blades in their hands. "Capture him. Kill him," Zhu Yi said with a cold expression. "Understood." The soldiers received the order and began to capture him. In the middle of the encirclement, Ning Fan's expression turned completely grim. He looked at Zhu Yi, who was standing behind the soldiers of the mansion. Without hesitation, he dashed forward with his sword in hand. All of a sudden, blood filled the sky. The blades and swords were dyed red. Just as the swords of the mortal world rose, the battle between Wang Jian and the devil god at the summit of the heavens gradually came to an end. The king's body was dyed red. His blood splattered all over the summit of the heavens. In front of the divine palace, the devil god's body was covered in raging waves. Divine flames soared into the sky. The might of the god of destruction was undoubtedly displayed. The devil god of destruction and creation was incomparably powerful. He looked down upon the eternal reincarnation and dominated the 9 heavens and 10 earths. He was so powerful that it made people feel despair. Wang Jian's life was like a fire in the wind. Facing the unparalleled strongest devil god of the heaven world, his life was on the brink of death. In the heaven world, the gods of the 8th heaven turned around and left. They were unwilling to watch the battle whose ending was already decided. When the divine sun rose to the sky and was about to return to the 8th heaven, it suddenly paused. In the divine sun, the god's feet paused. His face was filled with shock. This is... In the battle below, boundless sword intent spread out. It was colorless, formless and formless. It was a sword intent that had returned to nothingness. However, it contained endless destructive power. In front of the king, the 5th sword appeared out of thin air. The blade of the sword was transparent and almost invisible. The king raised his hand. The moment he held the blade of the sword, his blood flowed down and dyed the entire sword red. All of a sudden, blood-red sword light soared into the sky, illuminating the summit of the heavens. The appearance of the sword of death and defeat, which was the last king's sword to be destroyed, shocked the gods. Chapter 1574. At the peak of the heavens, the battle between humans and gods, the palm destroyed the heavens, lightning moved the earth, and the sword rose to the 9 heavens. The strongest demon god of the heaven realm, the strongest legend on the sword, the battle between humans and gods that spanned countless years, the battle was earth-shattering and shocking. At the end of the battle, when the demon god's palm technique was about to end, the 5th king's sword appeared in front of the king. The colorless, formless, and formless death defeat sword had a translucent body that was unpredictable. The king held the sword, and blood stained the blade. The blood-colored sword light soared into the 9 heavens. At the peak of the heavens, the wind and clouds rolled, and lightning flashed. Sword name. In front of the temple, the Nether King spoke. The human king held the sword in his hand, and a strange light flashed in his eyes as he asked, "Defeat?" The king opened his mouth and replied, "Sword of defeat, swordsman of the mortal world, have you already foreseen your defeat?" Facing the strongest king of the sword, the Nether King put down all his contempt and used his true strength for the first time. Suddenly, divine light spread around the Nether King's body, accompanied by wind and lightning, and divine flames soared into the sky. Layers of divine power destroyed the heavens and the earth. The strongest god of destruction and creation displayed his terrifying divine power. When all his power gathered, the heavens collapsed and the earth was destroyed. Around the Nether King, the earth rumbled and rose tens of thousands of feet. In the horizon, the stars collapsed, unable to bear the terrifying divine power. In the battle, under the pressure of the divine power, a shocking destructive aura spread out, destroying everything. Come, let the gods feel the determination of defeat. The Nether King raised his hand, and raging waves swept out rapidly. The divine power attacked, and the king's eyes flashed. The sword intent around him kept gathering, and he cut down the divine power with a sword. The sword of defeat was formless and formless. Wherever the sword intent passed, the divine power could not stop it. In the battle, the sword intent and divine power swept past each other. The terrifying power was actually evenly matched. Boom! A shocking shock wave spread out, and the demon god raised his hand to block the sword of defeat. The 3-foot cold sword could fight against gods. Blood dripped from the demon god's palm. In a head-on collision, it was injured again. 100 feet away, the king was hit by the divine power, and his injuries worsened. Blood stained his green clothes, but the king did not retreat half a step. The blood did not stop, and the sword did not stop. The king moved, and his body turned into a sword, and he rushed in front of the demon god. As the sword slashed down, its might became even more shocking. The king's sword once again surpassed the limits, reaching a new level. The Nether King raised his hand and blocked the formless sword. At such a close distance, the divine might and sword intent clashed violently. The The king's left hand grasped the air, and the sealing sword flew over and slashed down on the demon god's chest. The sword of defeat and the sword of sealing, the two strongest king swords, moved at the same time. Even someone as strong as the Heaven Realm's #1 demon god became serious. With a loud boom, black feathers fluttered around the underworld king's body. The 12 wings of sin extended out, shaking the battle. The rising demonic might was even more terrifying than the heavenly might. The #1 demonic god of the Heaven Realm, who had surpassed all the gods and demons, had completely surpassed the realm of martial arts. Are you ready? I'm going to start now. Kings used their full strength, while deities used their true strength. Silver light flashed in the demon god's eyes. After a short moment, his body finally moved. In the blink of an eye, the demonic god arrived in front of the king and struck out with his palm. Boom! The divine might could topple mountains and overturn seas. The sealing sword faced it head-on, devouring the divine might. At the same time, the sword of defeat slashed down. The indefinite and formless king's sword ignored the divine might and slashed toward the demon god. The demon god stretched out his hand and blocked the sword of defeat. At the same time, he pushed his palm technique to 30%. The demonic might was earth-shattering. The intense confrontation between a human and a deity had already surpassed any battle in the mortal world. The sword will around the king became stronger and stronger. As the battle continued, it continued to climb. The sword of defeat ignored all laws. The sword of sealing turned existence into nothingness. With absolute attack and defense, the legendary swordsman of the mortal world finally had the power to contend with the demon god. Across the ages, the demon god looked at the swordsman of the mortal world in front of him. Finally, there was a trace of emotion in his eyes. After countless years, an opponent that could interest a deity had finally appeared. Ning Yuan closed in, and the underworld king blocked the sword with his finger. The demonic might on the sword was quickly devoured and dissipated. Sword of sealing. The moment the underworld king blocked Ning Yuan, another sword light followed. Unlike the pitch-black Ning Yuan, the indefinite sword was almost invisible. Sword of defeat. The underworld king took 3 steps forward and avoided the second sword. At this time, behind the underworld king, sand filled the air. There were 10,000 swords in the wind, without beginning or end. Sword of formless. The underworld king's figure flashed and avoided the 10,000 swords. He looked at the sky and greeted them with a palm. Boom! The green sword light froze everything. Sword of extreme frost. The underworld king raised his left palm again, and divine flames surged around him. At the same time, not far away, a crimson sword light flashed. The flames on the sword surged and burned everything. Sword of blazing fire. The divine flames and blazing fire collided. The moment one sword was suppressed, the other 4 king swords arrived one after another. There's more. The Nether King stepped forward and looked at the blood-soaked king. He calmly said, "King's sword." Unfortunately, it's not enough. The underworld king raised his palm and pressed it on the king's chest. The sand sword and Ning Yuan blocked 90% of the demonic might. However, the remaining 10% was still unstoppable and heavily injured the king. The splattering blood dyed the 5 king swords red. It was extremely eye-catching. Hundreds of feet away, Prince Yen stopped. The battle had consumed his blood chi rapidly, and his divine sense was becoming blurry. However, the king's battle intent was even more shocking. In the blink of an eye, the demonic god's figure arrived again. He activated the power of his palms, and each of his palms landed on the king. The king's injuries became more and more serious, and his physical body gradually became unable to withstand it. In the battle, the divine flames on the underworld king's body surged violently, and his demonic might continued to rise. Facing the king's sword, even a god was aroused by an unprecedented battle intent. In the battle, the king's sword gradually surpassed the limits of the physical body. An indescribable sword pressure spread out, and even the destructive demonic might could not cover it. The underworld king looked at the king whose sword intent was rising in front of him, looking forward to the scene that he had always wanted to see. The swordsman in front of him was very strong, so strong that even he felt danger. However, it was still not enough. The sword was restrained, and it could not reach the true peak. However, after transcending everything, the only outcome for humans was death. Swordsman, how will you choose? In the battle, the sword intent and demonic might attacked again and again. Cracks appeared around the king's body, and it was gradually difficult to restrain the sword intent that surpassed the limit. Have you decided? The demonic god raised his hand, and his demonic might swept out like the waves of the sky. How can the king's sword be defeated? As soon as he finished speaking, the king's sword intent soared into the sky, and his collapsed physical body gradually dissipated. The physical body dissipated, and the divine soul appeared. The sword intent lost its restraints, and its brilliance was dazzling. It was endless, and it surpassed the heavenly destruction path. It was the true peak of the sword, and it suppressed all the laws at the peak of the heavens. Even the rules of the great path began to gradually collapse. In the void, in the divine sun, the god looked at the shocking changes around him, and his expression turned serious. It had appeared. In front of the temple, the underworld king's mouth curved into a smile of admiration. It had finally appeared. Chapter 1575. In the Zhu residence in the mortal world, dozens of guards quickly ran to the backyard to capture the assassins. In a room in the backyard, sounds of collisions kept ringing out. The intense battle had overturned the tables, chairs, and beds. The room was in a mess. The two of them started practicing martial arts almost at the same time. Their innate talent in martial arts was almost the same. One of them carried a sword while the other trained his physical body. Both of them had their own strengths. The guards barged into the room and surrounded Ning Fan. In the middle of the encirclement, Ning Fan held his sword in one hand and stared at Zhu Yi, who was standing behind the guards. Then he took a step forward and charged forward. In the cold night, the cold sword emitted dazzling sword light. The pupils of the two guards shrank. Blood gushed out from their throats and their bodies fell limply to the ground. Outside the room, two ladies walked into the room and observed the battle. Even though they were concerned, their expressions were as calm as still water. No one in the residence noticed their arrival. It was as if they could not see them at all. Master might be in danger. Yin Er looked at the intense battle in the room and said, "Just observe quietly." Qin Ning said calmly. Inside the room, weapons clashed. The curved blades were repelled by Ning Fan's sword, but they could not stop him. A bunch of trash. Seeing so many guards die in Ning Fan's hands, Zhu Ye's face flashed with coldness. He let out a cold harumph and took a step forward. His fist collided with the sword. Ning Fan's right arm went numb and he was pushed back a few steps. Qila. The moment Ning Fan was pushed back, a blade light flashed across his body, bringing out a waterfall of blood. Boom! In front of him, Zhu Yi dashed forward again and threw a heavy punch at him. Ning Fan held his sword horizontally and blocked the attack. A shocking tremor resounded in the dark night. Ning Fan took another half a step back. The corner of his mouth turned red. Swoosh, swoosh, at the same time, rays of blade light flashed across his surroundings. They were ruthless. Ning Fan leaned to the side and avoided two rays of blade light. Then he stomped his foot and leaped into the air, avoiding the third ray of blade light. In the air, Ning Fan swung his sword and cut off the arms of two guards. At the same time, he kicked the third guard away. However, when Ning Fan forced the three guards to retreat, he also revealed a flaw. Zhu Yi dashed forward and threw a punch at Ning Fan's chest. A muffled groan. Ning Fan's blood stained his plain clothes. In the backyard, Ning Fan fell to the ground and struggled to get up. At this moment, more guards arrived and surrounded the backyard. Ning Fan, you have nowhere to run. Zhu Yi walked forward, his expression cold as he looked at his old friend. Before I die, I will send you to hell. Ning Fan dashed forward. He swung his sword and slashed at Zhu Yi, who was in front of him again. They were once close friends who had entrusted their lives to each other. Now they were facing each other in life and death. They would not rest until one of them was dead. The ruthlessness of fate was on full display at this moment. Under the darkness of the night, there was a cruel killing intent. The light of blades and the shadows of swords were everywhere. Under the obstruction of layers upon layers of guards, Ning Fan killed his way out again and again. However, he was blocked again and again. As a mortal sword cultivator, Ning Fan was already strong enough. Even though he was surrounded by nearly 100 guards, he did not fall into a disadvantageous position. However, there was a limit to a person's strength. Mortals were made of flesh and blood after all. They couldn't sustain it for long. Gradually, the speed at which Ning Fan swung his sword began to slow down, as if he had reached his limit. "Bring me a knife." Zhu Yi looked at Ning Fan, who was injured in the battle, and said coldly. Beside him, a guard took out a long knife and handed it to him. Zhu Yi took the knife and walked towards the battle step by step. "Since we used to know each other, at least let me end your life with my own hands." As he spoke, Zhu Yi went forward and swung his long knife, intending to end the life of the person in front of him. Swoosh! The moment the long knife fell, Ning Fan's tired eyes suddenly burst out with dazzling light. He raised his sword to meet the attack. The knife and sword collided, staining each other red. Even though Ning Fan's body was injured, his killing intent did not decrease. He changed his sword momentum and cut off Zhu Ye's arm. Ah! Zhu Ye's arm fell to the ground, dyeing the blue stone in the courtyard red. He took a few steps back and his face contorted intensely. In front of him, Ning Fan, who was injured by the long knife, staggered and coughed out a mouthful of blood. The bookworm in the past has actually become so cunning. "Ning Fan, you have changed after all." Zhu Yi roared furiously with a ferocious expression. "People change." Ning Fan propped himself up with his sword and said with a cold expression, "In order to kill you, I'm willing to dye my body black." As soon as his voice fell, he stomped his foot and dashed forward again. "Kill him." Zhu Yi took 2 steps back and gave the order angrily. The guards charged at him like a tidal wave. Ning Fan leaped into the air. His sword glowed with cold light like the cold moon. In just 7 steps, no one could see him. That was a brilliant sword move. It was as if an immortal had descended to the mortal world. He had practiced the sword for 15 years just for this moment. In front of him, Zhu Yi subconsciously swung his knife to block the attack. When he came to his senses, he realized that his arm that was holding the knife had already been cut off. Ugh! The long sword penetrated his dantian and sea of qi, destroying his spine and dragon bones. Dazzling blood splattered everywhere. With his sea of qi broken and his dragon bones destroyed, Zhu Ye's body fell to the ground weakly. His body began to tremble violently. "Death is too light for you. I want you to live in fear forever to atone for the sins of the thousands of innocent soldiers of Yen country." As soon as his voice fell, Ning Fan drew his long sword. His bloodshot eyes stared at the guards around him and said coldly, "If you don't want to die, get out of my way. If you want to sacrifice your life for a cripple who betrayed his country, I will certainly fulfill your wishes." The guards around him exchanged glances with each other and subconsciously retreated. Ning Fan held his sword and walked forward step by step. Drops of blood dripped from the sword, dyeing the ground of the Zhu mansion red. While they were in a stalemate, Ning Fan walked out of the mansion. None of the guards dared to take the initiative to approach him again. However, not long after Ning Fan left the mansion, he fainted on the street. Not far away, Qing Ning walked towards him and helped him up from the ground. "Master's injuries are very serious," Mer said softly. "There's a dilapidated temple over there. Let's bring him there to rest first." Qing Ning said calmly. Then, she carried Ning Fan towards the west side of the imperial city. Picked up the blood-stained sword on the ground and followed them. In the west side of the imperial city, inside the dilapidated temple, a bonfire was lit and crackling. While his consciousness was still lingering, Ning Fan seemed to have seen a beautiful figure flash before his eyes. She was so familiar but also very unfamiliar. Master was so close to not being able to come out. Fortunately, he was smart enough to scare those guards. Said with lingering fear. He understands people's hearts, Qing Ning said while wiping the bloodstains on the face of the person in front of her. A traitor will never be able to win people's hearts. Zhu Yi has already been crippled. Why would those guards risk their lives for him? Beside the bonfire, looked at the blood-stained sword in front of her and said, "In this life, Master is really too weak." After learning the sword for 15 years, he still hasn't reached the Xiantian realm. It's enough. Qing Ning glanced at the long sword on the ground and said, "It's just an ordinary sword, but it helped him fulfill his life's wish. In his previous life, he held the strongest immortal execution 4 swords in the world, but he still couldn't change the ending of the human world. Since that's the case, I would rather he held an ordinary sword." Chapter 1576. In the mortal world, outside the ruined temple in the west of the imperial city of the Wu dynasty, dark clouds hid the moon, and heavy rain poured down. In the dilapidated temple, Ning Fan gradually woke up from his coma. His lifeless eyes stared at the bonfire in front of him. His face was filled with confusion. Why was he here? His memories slowly came back to him. He seemed to have recalled something. After crippling Zhu Yi, he fainted on the streets of the royal city. While he was dying, he seemed to have been saved by someone. The person who saved him was a woman, a strange yet familiar woman. Ning Fan struggled to get up. His eyes looked at the heavy rain outside the temple and gradually became absent-minded. Zhu Yi was already crippled, a cripple who couldn't speak or move for the rest of his life. He had received the punishment he deserved. Now that his wish had been fulfilled, he had no more worries in his life. Outside the temple, lightning streaked across the void, illuminating the dark human world. Ning Fan looked at the rainy night with a faint smile on his face. The world was so beautiful. Ning Fan walked into the rain. No matter how heavy the rain fell on his body, the smile on his face did not diminish. After taking a few steps forward, a dazzling light beam shot up to the sky from his body. It was as bright as lightning and extremely dazzling. He understood. Not far away, Qing Ning looked at Ning Fan and said softly. Demonic chi lingered in the horizon. 10,000 bolts of lightning surged. Heavenly flames burned the world. 3 tribulations shared the same sky. It was world-shaking. Under the rainy night, Ning Fan's chi rose rapidly. The 3 innate tribulations descended one after another. It's not over yet. Looked at the churning tribulation clouds in the sky and said in shock. After the 3 tribulations, the heavenly tribulations were endless. The 3 tribulations and 5 tribulations descended one after another. It was a terrifying scene that had never been seen before. The Xiantian realm was unstoppable. Ning Fan reached the full circle of the Xiantian realm in a single step. In an instant, he broke through the barrier of the Xiantian realm. Just as Ning Fan was about to step into the 3rd level, his rapidly increasing chi stopped abruptly and became stagnant. How shocking! Qing Ning's expression was filled with emotion as she said, "Advancing an entire realm in one go is unheard of." Genius! Exclaimed in admiration. Master, you're finally no longer restricted by your innate talent in this lifetime. In the rainy night, Ning Fan, who was going through the heavenly tribulations, seemed to have sensed something. His gaze shifted to the 2 people who were not far away from him. Under the void, the bodies of the 2 cultivators who had already reached the 4th level could not be seen by mortals. However, at this moment, Ning Fan seemed to have sensed their chi. "Thank you." Ning Fan opened his mouth and said softly. He knew that there was someone there, and the person who saved him was there. Qing Ning smiled but did not answer. "You're welcome." At the side, opened her mouth and replied sweetly. In the rainy night, when Ning Fan heard the answer, he was stunned at first. Then he laughed silently. It wasn't her. Although he couldn't see her figure, he knew it wasn't her. "Are you immortals?" Ning Fan asked. Nodded vigorously. "That's right." A smile appeared on Ning Fan's face once again. Then, it really wasn't the case. After asking the questions, Ning Fan did not say anything else. He walked in the rainy night and left the imperial city of the Wu dynasty. In the territory of the Wu dynasty, Ning Fan walked among the mountains and rivers that he was familiar with in the past. His state of mind became increasingly peaceful. On the heaven-shaking mountain, in front of a large river that flowed to the west, a woman in a light blue dress stood quietly. Her temperament was transcendent, like a fairy that had descended to the mortal world. It was destined that the two of them would meet again. When Ning Fan saw the lady in front of the great river, he recognized her identity at first glance. She was the long-lost princess royal of the Wu dynasty, Yu Ling. When Ning Fan saw Yu Ling also saw Ning Fan, who was walking toward her. Similarly, she recognized him at first glance. Among the two people who escaped from her blade in the south border city, one of them was Zhu Yi, who later betrayed the Yan country and became an important minister of the Wu dynasty. The other person was the man in front of her. "What's your name?" Yu Ling asked. "Ning Fan." Ning Fan answered calmly. "Do you want to fight?" Yu Ling continued asking. Ning Fan gently shook his head and said, "No." "You don't hate me?" Yu Ling narrowed her eyes and said, "I was the one who led the army to destroy the Yan country. You should hate me. The rise and fall of a dynasty is inevitable. The one I hate has never been the Wu dynasty or you." Ning Fan said with an indifferent expression. "Your Highness Princess Royal, why are you here?" "Then where should I be?" Yu Ling asked. "The imperial palace of the Wu dynasty." Ning Fan answered. "I've already conquered the entire eastern continent for the Wu dynasty. Why should I still stay there?" Yu Ling stared at the mountains and great veins in front of her and said indifferently. Ning Fan was speechless. He did not know what to say. "There's blood chi on your sword." Yu Ling retracted her gaze and looked at the sword in the man's hand. "Did you kill him?" "No." Ning Fan shook his head and said, "I just crippled him. This ending is what he deserves." Yu Ling's tone was indifferent. Greed is always detestable. Without him, the Wu dynasty wouldn't have defeated the Yan countries so quickly. Ning Fan said, "Therefore, according to my promise, I conferred him the title of Marquis." Yu Ling said calmly. "However, compared to him, those soldiers who died on the battlefield for the Yan country are more worthy of my respect." Ning Fan looked at the lady in front of him quietly, as if he wanted to see through her true thoughts. "I'm leaving now. We'll meet again someday," Yu Ling softly said. Then she turned around and left. "We'll meet again someday," Ning Fan replied. In the mortal world, when the two people who were destined to part with each other, the battle between humans and gods at the summit of the heavens had already come to an end. The sword intent broke through the limit. The king gave up his physical body and his terrifying sword pressure soared to the summit of the 9 heavens. The boundless sword intent spread in all directions continuously. The summit of the heavens turned into a world of swords. 10,000 laws trembled and dissipated under the sword pressure. "So, this is your sword?" The Nether King sensed the sword intent in the world around him. His figure flashed, avoiding layers of sword light one after another. In the world of sword intent, invisible sword light intertwined with each other. It was like rain, lightning, and also like raging waves. The sword intent changed. The Nether King raised his hand and blocked the 10,000 layers of sword force. His eyes flashed with a hint of surprise. There was no beginning and no end. The boundless sword was unavoidable and unstoppable. Blood spurted out from the Nether King's left arm. The devil god was injured. His expression turned gloomy. He raised both of his hands to the sky and raging lightning swept out. "Swordsman who has entered the Tao, let this god have a good battle." The devil god gathered all of his power. His divine might shook all directions. At the summit of the heavens, the power of destruction and creation rose to the extreme. A part of the world collapsed and was quickly reborn. The indescribable terror made people's hearts tremble. In the void in front, the king who had turned into a sword had 5 king swords floating around him. The majestic sword force continued to rise. It surpassed the limit and was infinitely close to the realm of gods. The path of the human Tao had a path, but the path of the sword had no end. The king gave up his physical body and finally reached the peak of the path of the sword. The dazzling sword light was even brighter than the divine sun. In the next moment, the king moved and instantly arrived in front of the devil god. The king pointed his finger and the sword intent gathered. It directly broke the protective shield around the devil god. The sword force directly pierced through the god's body. A pool of blood splashed out, dyeing the heavens red. Fresh blood flowed out from the Nether King's chest. It was so dazzling. The strongest sword since the ancient times finally touched the number one devil god of the heaven world and severely injured the god's body. The Nether King was not angry but happy. On his left and right hands, raging waves and raging lightning became more and more terrifying. The ear-piercing thunder resounded in the 9 heavens and 10 lands. The power reached the peak. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.